If you know anything about me and this channel, you'll know too well by now that RPGs and I have had our ups and downs through the years. For those of you who don't know me, first of all, hello, I'm Tronk, and I hope you're doing well today. Second of all, as a kid, I was horribly impatient when it came to video games. If a game didn't have some element of platforming or fluid movement or high-octane action or freedom, I probably wouldn't enjoy it or get very far in it. Super Mario Galaxy 2, New Super Mario Bros. Wii, Super Mario 64 DS, Mario Kart, Sonic Colors, Wario Land Shake It. These were the games that I obsessed over back in the day. Mario Party was the only kind of strategically oriented series that I could tolerate back then, and I'd be lying if I told you that the strategy was holding my interest over the minigames. What this means is that even a series like Pokemon, which frequently receives criticism for being way too easy, I was horrible at. I couldn't stand how rigid the battles felt in comparison to how it looked in the Pokemon movies and TV shows. I learned a few of the basics when it came to type matchups, but otherwise found myself consistently getting bored after half an hour of game time. Bear in mind, as a kid, a half-hour car ride felt like an eternity. Spending that much time on a game that I wasn't bouncing off of the walls for was the last thing that I was willing to do. At least, that's how it was when I was really, really young. Long story short, in my most formative gaming years, I didn't connect with many RPGs. This whole backstory is important today because the one series that never failed to capture my sporadic attention and is responsible for shaping many of my sensibilities for video games at large is the subject of today's video: Mario and Luigi. There's something funny about the fact that prior to this project, I had only ever played and beaten 2 of these games, yet I would still never hesitate to tell you that it's one of my favorite franchises in gaming. The fact of the matter is, my YouTube channel, where I somehow end up talking about RPGs and little else, does not exist if not for Mario and Luigi. I grew up on the DS, and Partners in Time was one of the most formative childhood video games I played. I wasn't great at video games back then, as you would expect, so I went through that intro many times in my youth and got really intimately familiar with the early sections of the game, but it was actually a non-platforming game, kind of, that I saw through to the end, multiple times. There was this super unique battling system where I had to time my attacks for maximum damage and likewise had to time my dodges to avoid damage altogether. It wasn't like Pokemon where you had to commit to your move and face the consequences of your opponent's move. There was a skill ceiling that, in theory, allowed you to play the entire game without taking damage at all. The story was this super weird alien invasion plot where Mario and Luigi got to travel through time alongside their younger selves. You got to run around and jump through these puzzling overworlds to progress. That was so insanely cool. Then you had all of these wacky attacks where you would kick Koopa shells and eggs, you would launch yourself out of a cannon, you could even make your own clone army. And man, that soundtrack was insane. I can't believe this is the opening song to a Mario game. It was the coolest game I had ever played at the time. When I finally beat it, that felt unlike any other experience I had with a game. I had finally gotten a taste of just how delightfully varied the RPG genre truly is. A few years later, my best friend and I got into Bowser's Inside Story at around the same time. Besides Pokemon Soul Silver, I think that was the first time I had ever played a game side by side with somebody, and it too holds a really special place in my heart for that. It helps that the premise for both games is so wildly unique, even for Mario standards. A game where Mario and Luigi go back in time to meet themselves as babies and fight aliens, and a game where you got to play as and sympathize with Bowser. Both Partners in Time and Bowser's Inside Story have long stood as some of my favorite games in the world, and even after playing and greatly enjoying the first 2 Paper Mario games for very similar reasons, I understand now that there is something special about the way Mario and Luigi specifically goes about the RPG formula that strongly resonates with me. I hope to explore why in depth in today's video. After Alpha Dream's unfortunate bankruptcy, following one of the least necessary remakes I've ever seen, and apparently years worth of stressful working conditions, I thought that was it. I didn't foresee a new entry in this series ever coming around, and even if there was one, I had my doubts that it would match the energy and charisma of those two formative games that made me love RPGs in the first place. Upon the opening announcement of the Nintendo Direct broadcast on June 18th, my jaw hit the ground and my heart accelerated to dangerous BPM levels. Mario and Luigi are back. Mario and Luigi are back. They're back. Mario and Luigi are back. And the animations are so zany and cartoonish. Come to think of it, this is the debut home console exclusive release of Mario and Luigi. How cool is that? The way I see it, there's no better time than now to get around to playing through this whole series to rediscover why these games mean the world to me, and maybe convince someone out there to try one of these games for the first time. Because I never know when to stop, we're going to be tackling all of these games in one big video to celebrate the series that made me love RPGs. There will be spoilers for each game, so if you want to go into any of them blind, I would recommend skipping ahead to the ones you've already played. The first 20 minutes will simply be highlighting the broader appeal of the series. Afterwards, it's no holds barred. But with all that out of the way, feel free to kick back, relax, get yourselves a snack and a beverage, and familiarize yourselves with those timestamps, and allow me to tell you about how Mario and Luigi made me love RPGs. Superstar Saga is incredible. It does a first-rate job establishing the formula and mechanics that would go on to be used in the later games, as well as having its own unique flavor that makes it feel far from basic compared to the sequels. I figure this gives us an ample opportunity to go over what exactly makes Mario and Luigi such a mechanically addictive series to myself and others. There's a lot to go over on that subject, but I cannot stress enough that Superstar Saga establishes these things with little to no growing pains. With the overworld side of the equation, you roam around a typically 3D environment with the two brothers and some others, where you run, jump, hammer, spin jump, drill, bounce. You do a bunch of cool shit in the overworld. You're not locked to up, down, left, and right grid-based movement. You get a whopping 8 directions to move in. You're also not this grounded little dork who can only be bothered to briskly walk in the direction you want to go. You cutely shuffle around and leap through these jungle gyms peppered with platforming challenges, item blocks, beans, minigames, and enemies. Every single enemy in the game is telegraphed in the overworld. Matter of fact, how you initiate battle is a game in and of itself. Jumping on or hammering an enemy will net you a first strike in battle, but enemies can do the same to you if they approach from behind. If you're hurriedly trying to breeze right past a room, you'll find yourself getting swarmed in an intimidating fashion. It's also important to pay attention to what kind of enemy you're striking. If you jump on a spiky enemy, it'll penalize you instead of granting you an advantage. What this means is that every enemy is meaningfully different to fight. In your typical RPG, weaker enemies can tend to all blend together if your stats are high enough. There's typically little stopping you from using your strongest standard attack and ending the fight without a single thought going through your head. All of those enemies can be taken out in the exact same way. It's not to say the Mario RPGs require a master's degree to comprehend by comparison, but you never find yourself in a situation where you want to mistime your moves. There's never a point where the game lets you mindlessly skim through encounters. Less mindful encounters absolutely do pop up, but there's at least a thin layer to them. Where enough enemy encounters in other games can grow tiring with enough repetition, Mario and Luigi enemies can still be fun to fight, even if only for the satisfaction of clearing an entire room. What's cool is that the inverse is also true, as you can flex your maneuverability by avoiding enemies. I find that the most boring part of even my favorite RPGs, including some of the other Mario RPGs, is walking through the overworld. It ends up being the part where you turn your brain off when navigation is purely centered on moving from point A to point B. Some level of downtime can be useful when it's not taking up an absurd amount of game time. As always, it depends on the game. The thing about me is, I unfortunately grew up and developed my brain during the era of technology and social media where, if I'm not receiving stimulation every 10 seconds, my focus will break. I need buttons to click. Walking around doesn't do anything for my tiny brain. I need some more feedback. The Mario and Luigi games are never letting you go a full minute without doing something fun. I think this is helped significantly by the fact that, aside from Brothership, these games were all developed as smaller handheld games. Replaying Thousand Year Door, I realized how the average time spent in a room or puzzle felt noticeably longer than it was in these games, which makes sense. Thousand Year Door came out on the GameCube and had way more space to utilize. Superstar Saga, meanwhile, has many small rooms that barely have any empty space. It's denser, which to me is a much more meaningful design philosophy because it feels honest. It doesn't feel like the game is trying to pull the hood over your eyes with a gigantic scope, it's just point blank showing you what you're in for and lets you explore it swiftly. Mario & Luigi not only has incredibly quick battles with regular enemies, almost too quick sometimes, honestly, but navigation and encounters both require you to be alert. It's not even some complex system that requires you to be thinking all too carefully. All of this becomes second nature pretty quickly. For me, that simple level of interactivity in all of the game's systems makes the whole game fun. Not just the combat and not just the platforming or the puzzles, the whole thing. The entire adventure feels so cohesive and enjoyable when you don't feel like a major chunk of gameplay can be boiled down to hold the analog stick forward. This, likewise, means that combat always requires your full attention as well, which is even better. There's a lot of overlap in these aforementioned mechanics with the first two Paper Mario games as well as Super Mario RPG, but Mario & Luigi differs from the earlier Mario RPG combat systems in a few key areas. Chief among them is how you can completely avoid or stop every single enemy attack in Mario & Luigi. Mario RPG, Paper Mario, and Thousand Year Door allow you to guard and super guard in the case of Thousand Year Door. But odds are you're not going into every fight without taking at least a little bit of damage. You're going to be consistently tanking at least a few hits every now and then. Mario & Luigi differs and makes mastery of combat avoid getting hit altogether, but also punishing you harder for failing. Guarding in Paper Mario is safer, as a regular guard has a fairly lenient timing window, but nevertheless still makes you take some damage provided you aren't a master of super guarding in Thousand Year Door. There's also a kind of subtle difference. I don't know if the name of the series gives it away. You also have Luigi to pay attention to, and not just Mario and his partner. Again, a key difference from Paper Mario is that in these games, these two are equal players. If Mario dies, you can keep going. It's not game over yet. If one brother dies, however, things actually get harder for you timing-wise. If you're holding a downed comrade, jumping and swinging your hammer are both delayed. I'm going to be honest, I think this mechanic is a little overly punishing since I find you're almost always going to be in dire straits with both brothers at once. Messing with your muscle memory in this way when it's down to the wire seems a little mean. I understand there should be some punishment for losing a party member, and I do love how much Mario and Luigi show their care for one another by defending their comatose brother. I also don't think many people would find these games to be all that challenging in the first place with how abundant save points are. I don't know, it's a little messy, but ultimately it does build on just how much style and character is injected into these games, and I'll circle back around to that point in a little bit. What Luigi's inclusion as an equal to Mario means is that reading an enemy attack isn't just a matter of paying attention to their animations to see what attack variation they're going to do, it's also important for you to recognize who the enemy is targeting in the first place. Like getting the jump on enemies in the overworld, reading your enemy's move is an entire game in and of itself. Every enemy will have some indicator, both subtle and obvious, of which brother they'll attack. It can be a head lean, a bright red or green glow, or maybe the enemy will just walk right up to you. You'll have some way of knowing which face button you need to hover over. It's here where I find it easiest to shed appreciation for the truly exceptional animations across the board, and this applies to every single entry in the series. Every enemy is injected with their own personality, and just their idle animations alone that you could write an entire backstory for some random goon. Like, these paratroopies seem like they have had it. They just want to go home and take a nap after working the register all day. The same applies to the titular brothers themselves. Losing a comrade in any other RPG is like, Zale's down! Oh my god, that kinda stinks. Isn't he our lifelong friend? Should we just maybe check if he needs a medic or something? He'll be back up in 2 turns, Garl. Just shut up and let's do a combo attack. Okay. When one of the brothers faint, the other one does this.
But does that mean our lives are meaningless? Does that mean that there was no point in our being born? Would you say that of our slain comrades? What about their lives? Were they meaningless? They were not! Their memory serves as an example to us all! The courageous fallen, the anguished fallen. Their lives have meaning because we, the living, refuse to forget them! And as we ride to certain death, we trust our successors to do the same for us! Because my soldiers do not buckle or yield when faced with the cruelty of this world! My soldiers push forward! My soldiers scream out! My soldiers rage!
I don't know, I would like to imagine it's something like that anyway. If it's not apparent in the animations, the special bros attacks will sell you on just how lighthearted and fun these games are willing to be. To emphasize the synergy between these two, these special attacks involve the bros doing some manner of ridiculous acrobatics or defiance of all known laws of physics. If timed correctly, they'll dish out the most damage and reward you with the coolest animation. Timing attacks is yet another thing that requires your attention no matter what stage of the game you reach. Even if you're up against a real pipsqueak in an early game area, you'll rarely get the chance to mindlessly spam the jump attack until you're back in the overworld. You always have to be mindful of your timing if you want to succeed, and it feels great to have this constant flex of prowess for the best results. What's fun is that it also means if you're practiced, you can waltz into a late game area and take out a monster and heighten the experience payout. Playing through Superstar Saga for the first time, I wanted to explore around the Bean Kingdom before entering the castle town, and ended up running into all of the Tanunbas and Babams and Paratroopes. I noticed they were surviving way longer than every other enemy I encountered before this point, like each battle was taking 5 times as long. Upon looking it up online, I now know that these enemies were levels 20, 30, and 35 respectively. For reference, the Drago Ho-Ho boss I had just fought was level 7, the swarm enemies you find before the Bean Castletown entrance are level 12, and the bros themselves were level 9 at the time. I could tell I wasn't meant to be primarily fighting these enemies yet, but I was still able to stand my ground. No matter how old I get, that feeling of being capable of taking on any challenge and having it all depend on your skill is euphoric to me. Even in Paper Mario, unless we're solely talking about being a master at Thousand Year Door, you wouldn't be able to do this without using up a ton of your recovery items, but here you can truly push the limits if the game will grant you the chance to show your stuff. This also makes way for potentially fun challenge runs with how much you can dictate your own performance. All of what I just laid out applies to every game in this series. What changes is how they build off of that foundation in later entries. I naturally have my own feelings about each of these games, but no matter what I say, simply by virtue of having these mechanics present at the core of each game makes them all worth playing in my opinion. Maybe there's some boring stuff going on in the story, but the bottom line is, no other RPG does it like the Mario RPGs. I think Sea of Stars is the only other one I've played that is as consistently fun on a moment-to-moment gameplay level. Of course, oftentimes a lot of other RPGs have deeply compelling stories, characters, messages, and themes that mean something more than just being a fun game. Video games don't have to strive just to be fun, they can be whatever the developers want them to be. I simply find it fantastic that both possibilities exist, that we get to have this delightful equilibrium between the two experiences. In truth, I feel like so long as you aren't looking for a serious or thematically rich story, I couldn't think of a major downside these games have unless that traditional RPG formula really does it for you, which, more power to you, if so. Superstar Saga deserves a lot of credit for not only building off of Paper Mario and Super Mario RPG in the way it did, but also for establishing so much of the character this specific Mario RPG series has. As I said, I grew up on Partners in Time, but I can easily see a branching timeline where I grew up playing GBA games and poring over this game as my childhood favorite. So much of what works about these games was nailed almost perfectly here. Matter of fact, I feel like these games are so good that they almost transcend age. The last thing I think you could argue about these games is that they feel dated. Maybe they have some gimmicks tailored around whichever system they released on, but in terms of core gameplay, enemy variety, scope, visuals, and beyond, I don't think it's a stretch to call many of these games timeless. Maybe I'm reaching a little bit here, but it never crossed my mind that Superstar Saga came out in 2003. The experience on offer in Mario and Luigi doesn't feel like something that needs to change, nothing more than giving each new entry a fun gimmick to spice up the core fundamentals. Superstar Saga may possibly be the best first entry in a series I've seen because those fundamentals are laid out so carefully. I suppose what we have left to talk about is the stuff unique to Superstar Saga. This game's story sees you traveling somewhere new to the Mario universe, the Bean Bean Kingdom. Mario and Luigi are in search of a cure to Princess Peach's newly acquired explosive vocabulary. Take notes, kids. This is what happens if you start swearing, you stupid motherfucker. This was forced upon her by the horrifying Cackletta and Fawful, who both seek conquest over the Mushroom and Bean Bean Kingdoms. Bowser takes you on his airship to travel to the Bean Bean Kingdom and proceeds to get lost on his own misadventures with the lovable Popple, and eventually becomes the host for Cackletta's soul for the final boss fight, so spoilers. Mario and Luigi, meanwhile, go on something of a world tour of the Bean Bean Kingdom, exploring a host of completely new environments featuring entirely new NPCs to the Mario universe. Oh, and by the way, almost all of them are beans. In this quest to help the familiar characters of the Mario canon, you also get to introduce yourself to this entire new culture outside of the Mushroom Kingdom. New customs, new species, new inventions, and all manner of new locales. I appreciate how fleshed out the Bean Bean Kingdom is. It doesn't feel like some isolated neighbor to the Mushroom Kingdom off in its own world, even though it largely is in future games. Instead, it feels like this lived-in place that's such a natural addition to this canonicity that it's a shame that no other Mario games build off of it. There is so much potential you could wring out of these places. There aren't just beanfolk living here, there's a town full of toads who immigrated from the Mushroom Kingdom called Little Fungi Town. Little Fungi Town. You get comedic and thought-out spins on the old cast on top of a fresh ensemble of charming newcomers. It's a delightful slice of its own thing. I know comedy, more than anything else, is incredibly subjective, but I feel like the slapstick and expressive sense of humor in this game has got to make you crack a smile, just a little bit. You fight a sentient barrel of soda, a wisecracking peanut who speaks like Yoda with a jetpack, and an incompetent burglar working alongside an amnesiac Bowser. How could none of those things make you giggle just the slightest bit? That and Prince Peasley! I was expecting him to be some overly cocky character whose whole shtick would be that he doesn't contribute anything to the effort of beating Cackletta, he just talks a big game, but he pulls his damn weight in this game. He's the one who warned Peach about Cackletta's goodwill ambassador work, helps you hunt down the fragments of the Beanstar, proposes the idea of using a fake Beanstar to trick Bowletta, and also rides a goddamn beanbag with wings. I love this guy. Try not to smirk while I describe this next mini-dungeon. You go into a pirate ship that was meant to deliver Chocola Cola, but ended up breaking down and got stranded for so long that eventually the ocean withdrew so far that now it's stranded in a desert. This passage of time also meant that the entire crew turned into skeletons and are just chilling out, waiting to take off any time now. That sounds so dire and depressing when you describe it, and yet this whole set piece was comedic gold. You need a membership card to go further into the ship. Allow me to repeat that. You need a membership card in order to plunge deeper into a pirate ship. You get this membership card by playing a minigame with Skeleton Donkey Kong involving matching colored barrels. Upon getting said membership card, you run into this fella who drank so much Chocola Cola that he is now one with the wall. When you unplug the wall, the ship sails back out to sea and immediately crashes into a rock and sinks again. How is this game real? That is such a ridiculous concept for an area, but it's genuinely perfect. Cackletta and Fawful are a stand-up comedy duo disguised as villains. They are comic book villains with almost no backstory. They yap and yap and yap, and yet they are show stealers. Dear God, and you have Popple here too. The concept of an inept burglar character could make even the most cynical person giggle like an idiot. Come on, look at his expressions. How can you not love this guy? What is by far the most heartwarming aspect to this series is the two brothers themselves. They're the namesake of the series for a very good reason. These games do better than most Mario games at selling you on how these two earnestly love each other. I've mentioned the myriad of ways this is mechanically reinforced, but the cutscenes work some kind of magic in making these two grown men absolutely adorable. It's gonna sound ridiculous, but I honestly believe that the fact these two only speak in fake Italian gibberish elevates this aspect of the stories. It essentially demands that the developers show you how much the two of them care about each other instead of telling you. In other Mario games, you seldom see these two working together for an entire adventure, and consequently, you hardly get a sense of their dynamic or see them team up. It kind of feels like the two of them are just there, even in the rest of the Mario RPGs, as much as I love the Princess Eclair of the Waffle Kingdom spiel from Thousand Year Door. This series takes advantage of this partnership, and it's so delightful for it. It's a hard feeling to describe, but seeing these two brothers confide in each other for both strategic purposes as well as emotional support, it just makes my heart feel full. I don't understand how or why these two grown mustachioed men can be this cute, but I don't pretend to care. The only real hang-up I had with Superstar Saga was one I would imagine many people share. The switching order and switching actions between Mario and Luigi is an absolute mess. I sympathize with the fact that they only had like 5 buttons that could do something other than pause the game on a Game Boy Advance. Hell, part of what makes combat so unique is the fact that each brother is assigned their own button. I also, however, can't ignore that I must have spent a collective half hour's worth of game time fumbling through the overworld actions. It primarily becomes a mess because of order switching the bros around. I'm glad this mechanic doesn't return in later games because it overcomplicates things. It never greatly frustrated me, but it was one of those menuing things that over time begins to get worse as you unlock more abilities. It was the one part of traversal that I found got so much better in future games. The other thing is, it's unintuitive trying to learn the advanced bros moves, even via the slowed down level 1 iterations of the attacks. They're not tutorialized, explained, or able to be practiced without using up your BP, so you kind of just need to fiddle around and fail a bunch of times to get it right. Swing bros, in particular, I had nothing close to an idea of how to pull off properly until I floundered upwards of 10 times. Again, just a small thing that gets much improved on in the sequels. Otherwise, I've got nothing. I think the moment I knew this game was a masterpiece was when I got around to the Yoshi Theater. First of all, I love seeing settlements comprised of Yoshis. Very based, Alpha Dream. Secondly though, this is where you run into the seemingly mandatory early 2000s Nintendo game making you backtrack to collect MacGuffins quest. This tends to be my least favorite part of this era of Nintendo games. I've tried to beat Wind Waker like 4 times, and every time I get to that Triforce quest, I realize I don't like this game anymore. Superstar Saga, meanwhile, let me almost bypass a similar quest entirely. Firstly, you can get all but one bean fruit before this quest becomes known to you. The only exception is the one Prince Peasley gives you, which, story-wise, adds up, seeing as he's looking for Beanstar fragments himself at this point, and it wouldn't make sense to have that happen beforehand. Not to mention, I find this whole interaction to be comedically entertaining at the very least, and that's good enough for me. The other 6 bean fruits, however, you can collect without issue as soon as you unlock the Super Hammers. The bean fruits are all made clear to you through the arrangement of blue flowers in a circle, so if you're just hunting for beans like the game encourages you to, odds are you'll find several bean fruits by accident thinking it's a regular bean. But what shocked me, even though it probably shouldn't have, is that the game marked all the bean fruit locations on your map and removed the ones you already collected. I couldn't tell you why, but I expected the game to just leave me to figure out which ones I already got and waste my time trying to narrow down the last spot on my own. The developers and the game alike made it clear they don't care to waste my time at all. Upon discovering this, I almost said out loud, oh thank God this is a good game. For something that early 2000s Nintendo lives in infamy for, Alpha Dream was over here doing it right from the get-go. Seriously, Superstar Saga is astoundingly impressive, especially for a first entry. The mechanical identity of the series was established in a nearly perfect fashion. So many of the ideas you see in this game end up in the sequels because they work so well. Spin jumping, drilling, shrinking, spitting water, bros attacks, item block minigames, overalls, badges, beans, all of these mechanics return in some form later. Yet it has more than enough to call its own compared to its sequels and its predecessors. I was pleasantly surprised to find this game was as good as I was led to believe. I felt a nostalgic attachment to this game despite never growing up with it. It was also like 15 hours long even when doing a significant chunk of side content, which as far as I'm concerned is a great thing. I enjoy it when games can give you a fun and memorable experience in less than 50 hours sometimes. Hard as it may be to believe given my average video runtime. If you don't mind paying for the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack and you're looking to try one of these games before Brothership, I can safely recommend this game to you. and the remake on 3DS seems as though it remedied the whopping 2 gameplay issues I had with the game. However you can manage to, give it a try. It's an absolute delight of a game, and one I can see myself revisiting in the near future. I want to level with you all before this next chapter. I cannot observe this game without being heavily biased. I say this because Partners in Time is not only a childhood favorite, but it's still in my top 3 favorites now. I can't pretend nostalgia has nothing to do with that. Funny then, how this game centers so much on traveling to the past. What's particularly interesting about Partners in Time is how I swear I almost never see people talk about the game. I feel like I have some idea what the consensus is on Superstar Saga, Bowser's Inside Story, Dream Team, and Paper Jam, but Partners in Time is lucky to be acknowledged in the first place. Alpha Dream themselves expressed the very same sentiment by choosing to remaster a game people already thought was one of the best Mario RPGs instead of the one that sold worse than both its predecessor and successor. It puts me in a weird spot. It's been a bit since I've felt compelled to put my all into defending an overshadowed game on this channel. Allow me to do my damnedest to share with you all why this game means so much to me. This is Mario and Luigi, Partners in Time. I think if there's anything I can say definitively about Partners in Time, it would be that it's incredibly unique, even when you compare it to the other Mario RPGs. I think the best way to illustrate this is by looking at how the game approaches its story tonally. I've heard a few people call it one of the darkest Mario games, and I would agree with the sentiment. Mostly. Don't mistake that to mean it's a dour and depressing game. I would actually argue it has some of the cutest moments in any Mario game to date. But there are a few points where the game can go to some pretty intense places. The Toadwood Forest, for example, is a location whose trees capture toads and drain the very life out of them for the Shroobs to utilize as an energy source for their flying saucers. The hub where all of this energy is siphoned off to is fittingly titled Vim Factory. It's not a plot point that's highlighted for very long, but truly think about it for a little bit. You're watching the last fleeting moments of a character's conscious life as they explain to you that an entire forest is enrapturing their people, whose life force is to be discarded as alien gasoline. Toads and Toadettes are being left to helplessly struggle in captivity in this dim, overcast forest as they watch their friends, family, as well as their own lives vanish in front of them. Oh, and by the way, even when they've reached the point where they can no longer move, these toads are still conscious enough to speak. Their suffering continues ad infinitum. Now is the obligatory moment where we ask ourselves how the higher-ups at Nintendo allowed this to get into a Mario game. Yoshi's Island is an environment that houses nothing but joy and whimsy in every other Mario game. The music is catchy and vibrant, plant life itself is alive and bouncing with energy, and Yoshis themselves are adorable enough in design alone that they can become any child's favorite character, myself included. Partners in Time leverages such conventions to house one of its most shocking and at times horrifying plot points, Yoob. This big fella waltzes up and swallows the village's inhabitants with an effortlessness that will give any invested player a good scare. This is magnified, if you will, by the sudden tenfold enlargement he gets from a nearby Shroob saucer. Soon after, Mario's and Luigi's are swallowed up, and learn that Yoshi's too are being imprisoned for the Shroobs' nefarious plot, attempting to rebirth the Yoshis as monsters likely modeled after Yoob himself, judging by the similarity in egg color. Upon defeating Sunnyside, Yoob doesn't do the usual poof that Mario enemies tend to do when they die. He instead sits there as this shallow husk, a monument to the Shroobs' magnitude of impact on the Mushroom Kingdom of old. Saying all of this doesn't truly convey the impact Alpha Dream managed to deliver as all of this happens. You don't just have a scene where Kylie Koopa tells you what happened to the Yoshi village, you instead get this build-up and growing feeling that the upbeat music and the lush, bright, grassy environment are deceiving you as you assess what's going on. You wander around a village of boarded up or empty houses that you know are supposed to have Yoshis in them. Yet the first person you stumble into is Kylie Koopa, who is similarly at a loss as to where everyone is. You look around a bit and observe the very large, very creepy egg that, if you're familiar with Yoshi as a character, shares very few characteristics of a common Yoshi egg. Then, the first words of the sheltered Yoshis in the attic are, "Shh, don't make noise." The music stops playing. Thunderous footsteps then approach as every Yoshi in sight sprints away in fear. And then you see him. Witnessing this sequence as a kid, when Yoshi was my favorite character, was chilling. It didn't terrify me, but at that point in my life, I had no idea that there were other color Yoshis. I didn't know Yoshis even had their own village. I certainly also didn't anticipate that they would get eaten alive and begin to transmogrify into servants of the Shroobs. This plot point does resolve relatively soon after defeating Sunnyside, but the impact of these moments is no less resonant. Again, having Yube's lifeless body remain on that cliffside for the rest of the game is still visually reinforcing the presence of Shroobs throughout the entire Mushroom Kingdom. The problem's been dealt with, but only in part. I think where the heaviest point of the game lies is Toad Town. I remember the music nearly brought me to tears as a kid when I first heard it. I was particularly sensitive to music back then for whatever reason. I have a number of embarrassing stories of games that made me cry just because the composers were able to move me. Classics such as Wii Music, as well as Wall-E for the Nintendo Wii. Yeah, I'm full of emotional depth. In any case, even the emotionally muted adult I am now can recognize why the scenery was capable of such a response. Once again, focus on the fact that this was a town viciously dismembered and desecrated by a hostile force of evil, and the only two civilians who remain here are two sweet old ladies. These two have watched their home fall apart, their loved ones get taken away, and have been sheltered in this one building as they watch dangerous enemies stomp around outside. If nothing else in this game can serve as your motivation to get back at Princess Shroob for everything she's done, this sequence should. This place almost looks more at home in a Last of Us game than a Mario and Luigi game, but I think it goes to show how Partners in Time can evoke strong emotional moments like this, even if the story is quite simple. Of course, those losses and struggles are almost all remedied by the game's conclusion. The baby tears cure almost every ailment the Shroobs enacted on the Mushroom Kingdom of the past, but all of said set pieces serve as an excellent motivator to get you to the end of the game and restore this kingdom to its former glory. There isn't a lasting doom to these aforementioned events, but they serve to sell you on just how powerful the Shroobs are. I think it's a clever inversion of Superstar Saga's premise, where mingling with the Bean Bean residents and culturally enriching yourself with their kingdom was your greatest asset in that game, granting you allies who help you take on Cackletta, as well as teach you new abilities. The Shroobs are a vicious group of colonizers who don't care to learn about you, your kingdom, or to establish a relationship with you. The Mushroom Kingdom's existence seemingly disgusts the Shroobs, and they want it gone. There's no clear motivation for Princess Shroob beyond a desire for conquest and a certain other thing that's revealed at the end, but it's honestly all the game needs. Part of what sells the Shroobs as such menacing villains is how, besides a few lines from Princess Shroob, the entirety of their dialogue is illegible and incomprehensible to you. You can't read their text that's almost all bolded and several times larger than your average lines of dialogue. While you don't get the wit or charm of Cackletta and Fawful, I think it's fair to argue that the Shroobs are more threatening than either of them ever were. No matter how hard you try, you'll never understand the Shroobs, and I don't think Partners in Time gets enough credit for managing to create the, at times, oppressive tone of a post-apocalypse in a Mario game, without being overbearing, of course. On that note, I love how Alpha Dream seemingly defied every trope of time travel stories in this game. A cardinal rule you see in most time travel stories is that before anything else, you should never interact with that timeline's version of yourself. Who could even fathom how many things could go wrong there? If it's a past version of yourself, you could be undoing so many events that led to you becoming your present self, and thus changing the very nature of your existence. Yet, Partners in Time makes its key appeal the fact that the interactions between Mario, Luigi, and their younger variants will stop your heart with how adorable they are.
Babies. Oh yeah. Thank you very much. Ah.
It's as if Alpha Dream looked at the wall of problems with establishing a time travel narrative and shrugged and said, I don't care. Hell, the game makes it a critical plot point that EGAD is somehow conscious of his own memories changing, as Mario and Luigi get his younger self to reach the life-changing revelation that water puts out fire. Stuffwell then remarks on how the paradoxical implications of this are truly profound. Simultaneously, this adds some stakes to the game's plot, because if EGAD's memories can be rewritten, it stands to reason that Peach's castle may also be changed in the future should the Shroobs establish complete dominion. I think that's meant to be the implication when more and more time holes open up as the plot progresses. Time itself is beginning to unravel until you get Peach's castle back and restore the previous continuity. At least, I think that's the idea. Then again, I somehow doubt future EGAD dousing a volcanic eruption and everything else that happens after the fact wouldn't be rewriting history. I'm not confident this is a spotless time travel story by any measure, but I think the relatively light emphasis on plot in Mario and Luigi makes this premise perfect for a wacky, ridiculous adventure. Speaking of wacky and ridiculous, the changes to traversal and combat in Partners in Time are nearly all for the better in my opinion. For one thing, thankfully the brothers don't switch order in this game, and instead each party member gets their own unique overworld action aside from the jump. Mario gets the ball button, Luigi gets the spin jump button, Baby Mario gets the hammer button, and Baby Luigi gets the drill button. The only real complication that arises from traversal in this game is that if you want to use the babies, you have to throw them off your back and rejoin by walking the two pairs back together. Honestly though, the animations of tossing and piggybacking the babies are surprisingly seamless, and I find it preferable to switching and spamming L and R in Superstar Saga because it's far harder to lose track of which character has which ability. The game utilizes the increased jump height of the older pair and the shorter stature of the younger pair to put great emphasis on the separation puzzles you had in Superstar Saga. In that game, you would have a handful of puzzles where Mario and Luigi moved independently of one another, and eventually reconvened once the puzzle was solved. In doing so, the game emphasizes unique abilities to each brother, but also how much more effectively the two of them work together as a single unit. I always hated when there would be a disparity in experience points between the two characters, so it always made enemy encounters especially that much more of an obstacle in my efforts to keep that gap as small as I possibly could. Partners in Time, upon moving beyond the tutorial portion of the game, makes nearly every puzzle emphasize that idea at some point. In Vim Factory, you encounter 2 locked doors necessary to progress to the boss room and a bonus room. You toss the babies up onto a ledge unreachable for the adult brothers and hit a switch to clear the electric gate in the way. The adult brothers then hit a pair of blocks that allows the babies to progress further, the babies hit another switch to clear a second electric gate. Finally, both pairs of brothers hit the 2 connected pairs of blocks to allow the babies access to the final 2 switches back in the main room. A puzzle of that ilk is present in essentially every area of this game, where it was really only a major emphasis in Joke's End in Superstar Saga. Depending on who you are, this could be a good thing or an annoying thing. Aside from one archetype of puzzles, I think this being the main gimmick of the game is a welcome change from how Superstar Saga did things. I welcome it because the 2 pairs on their own can still hold their ground in a way Mario and Luigi independently could not in the previous game. For one thing, you can still do some but not all of the bros attacks, and when you have the entire team of 4 together, you have a much higher ceiling for damage potential. Granting each separate pair utility with bros attacks, but also highlighting how every member of the team is important for the best performance. It's a limitation, but not one that entirely removes the synergy and off-the-wall attacks that are so much more fun to pull off compared to your basic jump and hammer attacks. None of this is even highlighting that the babies grant you new variants of nearly every move. A jump can turn into a double jump, a hammer swing can become twice as powerful, green and red shells can be spun extra for greater impact, fire and ice flowers can now hit airborne enemies, smash eggs can be boosted higher into the air for harder timings but more damage, and pocket chomps get an additional hammer swing thrown into the mix. You can do all of those attacks with one pair of the brothers, but keeping your full party together allows the damage capacity and the intrinsic challenge of timing every input perfectly to rise. Had the limitations felt more imposing, this gimmick likely would have worn out its welcome for me, but I've never found that to be the case in this game. The only part of the game I could stand to live without is the hovering platform puzzles. You have this subset of, let's call them obstacles, where you have the babies tucked away on the top screen and the adults standing on a hovering platform on the bottom screen. The babies have to hit a switch that can move said platform in one of 4 directions incredibly slowly, and it almost never gets more complicated than that. It tests awareness of the two screens simultaneously, which I'm normally a fan of, but in this case it just feels like a clunky gimmick that wears thin in that first instance of it in Toadwood Forest. I find that the rest of the puzzles involving splitting attention between the two screens were more creative. In Gritty Desert, you have to separate the pairs to opposite halves of the map to coordinate the laser blast from these drybone statues. In Yube's Belly, you have these colored orbs whose pattern you have to match with the one in front of the door. Throughout the game, you also have a multitude of segments wherein the babies navigate a path above a spiky floor where the adults have to provide these shine blocks to illuminate the path forward. None of these puzzles are necessarily mind-bending for an adult. I don't think any of these games really seek to stump you necessarily, but I remember them being satisfying to figure out as a kid. In terms of structure, Partners in Time is a much more transparently linear game than Superstar Saga. Superstar Saga itself was mostly linear, but there were pockets of time where you could run around the Bean Bean Kingdom and get lost seeing certain paths you can't access yet that eventually will pay off once you unlock the requisite ability. You also could fight some higher level enemies if you were feeling risky. Moreover, there was a hefty amount of side content and optional platforming jungle gyms to find that broke up the pace of enemy encounters fairly well. That said, the original GBA game also didn't have a readily accessible detailed map and had a few paths that intertwined enough to the point where I forgot where a few important NPCs like the Hammerhead brothers were so I could get the Super Hammer upgrade. Overall though, it was ideal for Superstar Saga's premise, and it gave you some freedom to explore. Thankfully, navigation in Partners in Time is made much less daunting by the top screen housing a map of the current area nearly at all times, a mechanic that would thankfully make its way into every future entry in some form. It's funny that this was the game to introduce the map though, because Partners in Time has hardly any side content. The only truly big optional thing in this game is Fawful's Bean and Badge, which even then is pretty blatantly emphasized to you when he sets up shop in the sewers. I can imagine for some this seems greatly limiting. Personally, I enjoy the Mario and Luigi gameplay loop enough that it doesn't bother me that Partners in Time is fairly comfortable pushing you through the main story and leaving all the exploration to the more contained areas you find yourself in, which also happen to have no shortage of fun minigames to spice up the path forward. For one thing, my total runtime of Partners in Time footage was almost exactly 3 hours shorter than my total Superstar Saga footage. The game doesn't overstay its welcome at all, and you move from area to area at a satisfying pace. I never found myself getting sick of any of these locations by the time I got to the boss. I was actually surprised by just how briskly I went through sections of this game I could have sworn felt like they took me full hours to complete when I was younger. The longest non-dungeon region, Star Hill, only took me an hour and 17 minutes to get through before I returned to Peach's Castle. I would hardly say each of the segments within it visually or mechanically retread much of the same ground. It all feels fresh and keeps you barreling forward. It's fun. On the hub world end, I'll admit I'm somewhat torn. Superstar Saga has a number of regions with branching paths in the main hub world of the Bean Bean Kingdom. It feels immersive and compelling to explore. Partners in Time, meanwhile, has Peach's Castle, which is far more structured for utility over organically connecting the game's areas. You go to a time hole that leads you to the next location in the past being meddled with by Shroobs, you run to Egad to learn what your next goal is, you run to the shop to buy gear and items, and occasionally run back to the courtyard to check in with the Toadsworths and learn a new ability. I'll admit, it doesn't do much for me compared to the bustling energy of the Bean Bean Kingdom, but it feels like something of a reprieve from the dangerous locales you're placed in for the proper adventure. Almost all of the places you travel to have been damaged or seized by the Shroobs, and thus require you to be on your guard. Hearing that familiar Peach's Castle tune after a hefty chunk of story content is relaxing, and the game does make it pay off better than Superstar Saga's final dungeon. Bowser's Castle, while structurally and mechanically satisfying, visually feels like an incredibly lame way to end a game that takes place in the Bean Bean Kingdom. After a whole game of immersing yourself in this lovingly crafted, goofy, and entirely original world, ending things in what is easily the most standard Mario Final Dungeon locale and fighting the Koopalings just before the final bosses felt pretty uninteresting. It's not completely devoid of thematic purpose, mind you. There is something cool about the two greatest evils of both the Mushroom and Bean Bean Kingdoms threatening this overworld that you've grown to love. It's also kind of hard to complain when the music slaps like crazy. However, I think Shroob Castle is an excellent final dungeon in every way. This place has been built up as your final destination before you even had a full party of 4. It's an inversion of the place you would call home for the whole game, and it's a great final demonstration of just how badly the Shroobs have desecrated the Mushroom Kingdom. It also starts the trend of Mario and Luigi games having some of the hardest finales of all time, but I'll get a little too excited talking about that later, just you wait. While Peach's Castle itself isn't thrilling for a main hub, I do think it works to make that finale land much better. I'm having trouble describing how I mean this, but I find there to be something so almost endearing about how enthusiastic Alpha Dream was to implement both of the DS screens into the experience. Whenever you're in a cutscene and something pertinent is playing on the other DS screen, the game plays this sound effect with the blinking arrows as if it's some sort of event, as if Alpha Dream was like, whoa, 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 wait a second, kiddo, I bet you haven't seen a game do something this radical before. Go ahead and alert yourself to that top screen. I find it equally endearing how much the game clearly loves using the whopping 4 face buttons afforded to them by the new hardware. It may be the 2000s baby in me, but where I'm sure this is dating the game pretty heavily in a sense, I can't help but find it to be a cute and welcome utilization of the DS's features. Outside of the touchscreen, that is. In the combat system especially, the game loves utilizing flying enemies and various bros items that you could only pull off on a DS screen. Smash eggs are nearly impossible to kick properly without the screen laid out in the original DS orientation. I have an embarrassing number of clips where I just completely waste some of them. On the subject of bros attacks, a mechanic that I've noticed people don't seem to like, specific to Partners in Time, is that bros items, instead of being moves that you learn and spend BP to utilize, are a finite resource. You can, in theory, run out of a specific special move should your inventory run low. But if I can be honest with you, I don't really find that there's all that much to dislike about this mechanic in practice. Originally, in this part of the video, I had this big spiel where I talked about how this game will constantly stock you up with items, such that I never bought one from a shop for my whole playthrough, and still never even came close to running low. There's the ulti free badge in Fawful's Bean and Badge too, which lets you use infinite bros items at the cost of 90 beans, which means you would only need to dig up a little more than half of the total bean spots in the game in order to unlock it. I honestly feel that you would have to be very new to video games, actively trying to avoid question mark blocks and or doing a challenge run in order to run out of an item entirely. Originally, I thought the major complaint was that running out of items was a pervasive issue. Like I said, I basically handicapped myself from buying items, but I did also use the ulti free badge in my playthrough and still had heaps of each bros attack by the end. In fact, if I'm understanding correctly, I think that's what many people criticize about this system. Upon looking further into the talking points surrounding bros items, I found that people more so seem to dislike how the game gives you so many, and not needing to refill your BP means you have virtually no punishment for spamming them every turn. I can certainly understand this argument, and I'll even go as far as to say that I 100% agree that syrup items in BP are a more balanced system in that respect. Personally, upon playing through this whole series for this video, I didn't find any of these games to be even remotely difficult when it comes to resource management. In every one of these games, if you're exploring even a little bit, you'll be getting so many mushrooms, syrup bottles, and 1-ups that I find, in practice, that Partners in Time just cutting out the middleman of managing your BP doesn't end up changing all that much for me. Not to say it doesn't change anything, a couple turns of refilling and enemy attack dodging can certainly be significant, but personally I found all of these games to be so easy to approach, even the games I had never played before, that having to spend less time managing BP is honestly refreshing at times. Partners in Time may end up being one of the easiest games in the series for this, but I appreciate that it'll basically just let you go nuts. Again, I think BP is the better system overall, but when people criticize Partners in Time for this, like it ends up being a huge problem that makes it play so radically different from the other games in the series, I can never really fully get behind it. If anything, I kind of enjoy that having a stock of items can give you the incentive to use your more plentiful attacks instead of your rarer ones. I think why this ultimately doesn't bother me at all though is that I found my mindset surrounding using bros items was nearly identical to my mindset surrounding bros attacks in the rest of the series. I grew up playing both Bowser's Inside Story and Partners in Time, and both of them were very, very easy for me as a grown adult. All I mean to say is, I don't find it changes that much that I saved a few turns of refilling and attack dodging in Partners in Time comparatively. One of my favorite things about Partners in Time is how these attacks have turned into minigames in their own right. In Superstar Saga, Bros attacks were much closer on the sliding scale to proper special moves in other RPGs. They did more damage and took more time and precision to pull off, but they also would end pretty quickly. By the time you unlock Pocket Chomps in Partners in Time, the rest of the ensemble of attacks is like if you started playing a Mario Party minigame in the middle of your typical RPG battle. I put this line in the script as a joke more than anything, but I forgot that the Shroids literally make you play Shy Guy Says to avoid getting hit. This game is amazing. There are multiple Bros attacks that you can theoretically one-turn kill a boss with if you keep timing correctly. They can go on for an infinite amount of time if you're practiced enough. If you recall my whole spiel of enjoying how Superstar Saga let you fight higher level enemies in the Bean Bean Kingdom overworld, suffice it to say, I am similarly very positive on the fact that you can demonstrate your mastery of the combat system via your items in this game. I almost felt bad about how quickly I ended up killing some of the bosses. As a kid, these fights felt like insurmountable walls since they took longer than 30 seconds to surpass, which was obviously an abhorrently long time to be doing anything, as we all know. Perish the thought of doing anything that takes longer than 30 seconds. In this recent playthrough, I almost felt like I was invalidating the work the developers put into the attacks and animations of these characters when I killed Mrs. Thwomp within the first time she splits into 4. She's supposed to be able to do this multiple times, but I never even saw her attack in her larger form once. I just felt a strange sense of guilt creep over me, even though she was my nemesis as a child. If anything, I'm incredibly interested to try a minimum level run of the game to see how challenging I could make it for myself. Say what you will about Partners in Time, but it knows how to end things. Mostly. The final boss is completely unnecessary, and I wish they found a better place to try this mechanic, because a boss fight where you only evade is a great idea. Dream Team and Paper Jam thought so too, and it works great in those games. It unfortunately feels entirely unnecessary to end on a Bowser fight, because the proper final boss is incredible, beginning the trend of Mario and Luigi finales going insanely hard for no reason. First things first, the initial fight against Princess Shroob is excellent on its own. You first have to eliminate her shield before dishing out any proper damage, which prompts her to do an entirely unique subset of attacks. When her throne is operational, she utilizes every piece of Shroob technology available to her, but when on her own, she wields this Zelda-like light magic she'll barrage you with from every corner of both DS screens. She has an enormous amount of HP, and you really get to relish in Yoko Shimomura's work here. This track sounds like it should be in a Kingdom Hearts game, but I'm not complaining, it's awesome. It's a mystery to me how she manages to create such an atmosphere out of a track being crunched through a set of DS speakers. For as long as the fight is, it's a pretty simple affair for a finale. Too bad that's only 1/3 of what you're in for. I think the plot twist of Elder Princess Shroob being inside the Cobalt Star all along is a neat twist for an otherwise simple plot of get all the star pieces and save Peach. It's a cool way to transform the entire context of your objective on repeat playthroughs, especially on Star Hill. I appreciate that this reveal also makes sense of why the shards were scattered so far away from each other in the first place. Peach really didn't want you to let this happen so easily. It's fun to have the rug swept out from underneath you like this when it means you get an even more intense final boss. The Elder Princess Shroob reveals herself, propels your party and Princess Peach thousands of feet into the air, and declares to destroy your beloved kingdom once and for all. You hear that same boss theme kick in and begin whittling away at her titanic wall of HP. You encounter that all too familiar feeling of surprise when your bro's attack ends early, only she doesn't fade away. Yoko Shimomura just had to show off again, didn't she? Every appendage is its own attack that you need to worry about from this almost Lovecraftian monster. You get to experience a gratifying sense of character growth when you swat away the Shroob saucers that at one point made you mandatorily lose at Holly Jolly Village. You aren't only unbothered by them, you swat them back at their princess as just another attack. They're your projectiles. You need to destroy her crown in order to do any significant damage, but you would do well to take care of the rest of her tentacles, unless memorizing more attack patterns is what you're looking to do. You land a legendary final blow, watch that satisfying explosion animation one final time, cure the Mushroom Kingdom and its inhabitants, and say goodbye to the babies and Toadsworth. Roll credits. I know this game doesn't necessarily do it for everyone, and in some ways I can understand why, but it's such an enjoyable time for me. I have a nostalgic attachment to it stronger than most, I imagine, but here's the thing about nostalgia. It doesn't make you utterly blind to something's shortcomings. I've played plenty of games and rewatched plenty of movies from my childhood as an adult and came to the realization that, wow, this is bad. I'll admit that I definitely have a favorable push towards Partners in Time, but coming back all these years later, it only makes more and more sense to me how it formulated my taste in games. The tonally balanced story, the striking and varied twists on traditional overworld themes, the expressive and heartwarming character interactions, the interactive and rhythmic combat system, the striking animations, and the consistent flow pushing you from one interesting thing to the next with little time being wasted. These are the things that I value in video games, and Partners in Time succeeds at so many things that anything it gets wrong, like the bosses being incredibly easy to cheese, those obnoxious hovering platform puzzles, and that unnecessary final boss, don't really matter to me. The fact is, even as a 22-year-old, I got 12 hours of unrelenting fun with what remains as one of the most unique Mario games to date. For my money, that's what counts, and I was so happy to revisit a game this important to me with the ability to say, yeah, this is still one of my favorite games ever made. You would think that Alpha Dream would maybe reel it in after Partners in Time. I mean, hey, maybe a game about time travel and alien apocalypses is a little too out there for Mario. For the next one, you would imagine they stuck with something a little more standard. But then, you hear a single voice line that lets you know that you're dead wrong, but more importantly, that you are in for something truly special.
Showtime!
From what I've seen other people say, Bowser's Inside Story is often considered the best Mario and Luigi game, and one of the best Mario RPGs in general. This is correct. I have an unbreakable admiration for Partners in Time, and I always will, but if I really sat down and was fully honest about which game I think exercises this franchise's humor, aesthetic flourishes, and sheer creativity with the most finesse, I think Bowser's Inside Story swallows that cake up whole. To start off on a tremendous note, Fawful is the primary big bad of the story, and it doesn't sound promising on paper, but in practice, he becomes one of the best villains in the series, possibly my favorite at the very least. Fawful was a largely comedic character in Superstar Saga, but he played his role as the second in command to Cackletta extremely well. His primary characteristic there was that he was loyal to her until the very end, otherwise showing that he was at least observant enough to not take the fake Beanstar. In Partners in Time, it was teased that he had something cooking that he wasn't willing to disclose until the time was right. This has been building from game one, and surprisingly, promoting him to primary antagonist may have been one of the best decisions made in any one of these games. Fawful sets up the entire game's conflict, and in general has a much greater intellect that you didn't get to see very much in Superstar Saga. He's responsible for giving the Toads the Blorbs epidemic, gives Bowser the vacuum shroom, lets him do all the work of clearing Peach's castle, sends Bowser on his merry way so he can take over Bowser's castle, and in doing so, he claims resources from both sides of the kingdom. He kidnaps Peach in one of the weirdest scenes in any one of these games, and later claims the Dark Star. Judging by the incredibly subtle name, the Dark Star contains untold levels of evil power that will allow anyone who claims it to basically take over the world, only able to be defeated by the the 3 star cures. It's weird, you wouldn't think a little squirt like Fawful would be a compelling major antagonist, but when he gets his hands on the Dark Star, you can feel the tension hike up tenfold. Fawful is almost always a step ahead of both the brothers as well as Bowser. In the way of resources and being capable of using them, Fawful may be the best villain in the series. There are several key points where Fawful easily takes advantage of just how vain Bowser is. It is objectively hilarious that Bowser's goal for the entire game is basically to just shove a nerd into a locker for punking him. Possibly my favorite line in the game is during their final one-on-one fight where Bowser calls him a weird little babbling nerd. What is so fantastic about Fawful being the primary villain is that, for one thing, you have a common enemy between the brothers and Bowser, which allows the whole premise of the game to work. It also means that the tone can transition between ridiculous Hanna-Barbera cartoon goofiness and a world domination plot with just how insane his dialogue can be. There are points in this game where you can earnestly sympathize with Bowser when you see his castle get overrun and see his minions turn on him. Aside from the minions you rescue from captivity in the overworld, Bowser is basically completely alone. At least, he thinks he is, anyway. Starlow's there to teach him some manners, but I doubt he appreciates that very much. In a way, it's weirdly inspirational how Bowser never gives in until he's at his absolute limit. He may be a villain, but even when his back is up against a wall, he's a hustler. Nobody can accuse him of being lazy, that's for sure. Of course, he is still more than willing to bark orders at any and all of his minions, as well as Chippy to fix whatever problems he's facing in his body. I think Bowser's back and forth with Starlow is where she works best as a character. Starlow seems to be something of a divisive character, being a tutorial character in a series infamous for having too many tutorials that you can't skip, but I mostly like her. I think conceptually, a character from a species of sacred all-knowing star sprites who actually is just a brat is pretty hilarious. I don't enjoy how in future games she devolves into a Luigi bullying machine. It's extremely unlikable, but her snark against Bowser is a consistent source of entertainment for this entire game. She's a hell of a lot more memorable than Stuffwell was, at the very least. While on the subject of tutorials, if you could levy a complaint against every one of these games, it would be how pervasive and prevalent tutorials are throughout the entire journey. This isn't much different in Bowser's Inside Story, however, especially in Bowser's half of the game, there's at least a decent injection of character and humor to get out of it. It forms a level of player association with one of the most unambiguously evil characters in gaming because you're right there with him. I too want this tutorial to be over with, Bowser, you get me. Really, Bowser's complete impatience with any and everyone who isn't giving him something tangibly useful for his immediate objective is so funny. I'm not sure why, but it seems such effort was only put towards Bowser's tutorials. Like, the first fight you have as Bowser is taught to you by Fawful trying to warn Midbis what Bowser's attack timings are. Contextually, it makes sense for him to be saying this to warn his minion, but it's also a quirky, backhanded way of verbalizing the right time for you to punch. It's an unskippable tutorial as this is an essential combat technique to master, but this game goes the distance to show that it doesn't have to be an irritating monologue from Toadsworth again. Really, I think if they just had Fawful give you every tutorial, we would have nothing to complain about. Bowser's addition to the game is exactly the kind of gimmick that I think Mario and Luigi as a series should aspire to adopt in each entry. As much as I love the core gameplay of all of these games, at the end of the day, Mario and Luigi's core moveset has stayed exactly the same since Superstar Saga. Again, I think it's a testament to how mechanically sound that first game is, considering its ideas were good enough that nearly all of them are brought back in later games. At the very base of it though, in terms of attacking normally and defending, the combat system has stayed exactly the same. Sure, the timings may be different, the enemies and their patterns will be different, and the bros attacks will be wild and creative, of course, but you hardly have anything to relearn from game to game. Bowser, on the other hand, is an entirely fresh palette. First of all, the big guy thinks so highly of himself that he takes up 2 whole face buttons? Who does this guy think he is? What's particularly excellent about this is how it entirely changes your approach to exploring the overworld. Since Bowser has 2 main abilities but is only a singular entity, there are far fewer repeated puzzles involving splitting Mario and Luigi up or timing your hits to activate something. These puzzles do exist in Mario and Luigi's segments, but the fact that Bowser's overworld traversal is so wildly different makes for a game chock full of variety that keeps the game's core concept so exciting. Bowser is far less agile than the two brothers. He can't jump, at least not while moving, but he is much stronger and has a ranged attack option of breathing fire, which brings with it a slew of new environmental hazards and puzzle-solving opportunities. During combat, you can now punch or duck underneath enemies and projectiles. Instead of needing to recognize which brother an enemy is going after, you instead need to pay mind to which side of Bowser an enemy is gunning for. What this also means is that every upgrade for Bowser is something you have never seen in one of these games before or since. A sliding punch attack, scaling walls and rolling along spiked floors with Bowser's shell, minion special attacks, Bowser kaiju fights, and most importantly, inhaling enemies. Inhalation can be quite a handy mechanic to use against most enemies you fight as Bowser. Many enemies have healing items or stat boosting peripherals that you can just yoink for yourself. Not to mention it's also how you collect the blitties for Brock Monsieur. Something even cooler though is that if there are smaller goons around, Bowser can relegate the task of defeating them to the brothers and makes even unimportant fights feel like multi-stage encounters going between the two combat styles. What's most brilliant about the variety in movesets between the Mario Brothers and Bowser is that Alpha Dream managed to squeeze a lot of utility out of the different overworld regions. There are paths that are only accessible through specific abilities, as always, but you also need to be certain that they're abilities your current character is capable of using. You see bean spots peppered along the beaten path for one, but you also will find gates that you need to drill underneath, ledges that can be jumped up, and if you're using the map, you'll see entire rooms that are inaccessible to you as Bowser. Of course, this applies the other way too. Bowser is the only one who can roll up walls, slam down pink switches, punch through boulders, and burn down trees and other obstacles that the brothers just have to walk around or just put up with. I wasn't looking forward to replaying the final Star Cure segment on this revisit of the game because when you lay out everything that you do during this quest, it sounds awful. Go back to these locations that you've already been to as a different character in search of a quest MacGuffin. Could you possibly think of a lazier way to pad out a game? Talk about a contrivance too, making you go back to Black Beach and Dimble Wood. They just had to squeeze every last hour out of you, didn't they? Then, you play the game, and it's great. For the inquisitive types, such as myself, it's greatly satisfying to not only unearth all of those bean spots, which is made extra sweet by the fact that they're back to being permanent stat upgrades, but you also get to experience a wildly different gameplay loop exploring these places as the brothers. You can do some puzzles with Cuzzle to earn the spin pipe attack on top of more beans, and in doing so you learn that he was the second sage that Bowser stole that Star Cure from. You comb around these cliffside structures at Black Beach and balloon jump up to meet Chakron, and you can fight all of those smaller enemies that Bowser would just trample over when he went through these places. Just about the only thing that's repeated is the main path you're walking through, but it's so liberating being able to jump up ledges you previously couldn't that it barely registers. Even going after all the beans, this segment reads as so much more than an excuse to reuse an area the team already built. It may as well be considered entirely original content. Bowser's Inside Story also doesn't let the curious player go unrewarded for revisiting optional overworlds as Mario and Luigi. If you go back to Bowser's Castle and comb around the underground sector, you'll find all of these signposts with clues written on them pertaining to some sort of password involving shapes. You go to the freezer room, input the correct sequence, and you get treated to a homage to Partners in Time. You get this neat optional boss fight against 3 Shroobs that reuse some of their attacks from the previous game. Not to mention they also do this for some reason, which isn't very in character, but hey, it's funny. Your reward for completing such a task is a Hidden Bros attack, the Magic Window. This just so happens to be the only attack in the game that you can extend infinitely if you keep timing your inputs correctly, harkening back to so many of the attack items in Partners in Time itself. What a clever, fun reference tacked onto a rewarding optional endeavor. The amount of optional content in Bowser's Inside Story is enough to make up for Partners in Time's relative lack of anything optional besides Fawful's Bean and Badge. While I'm drawing comparisons between the two games, I think Bowser's Inside Story makes a marked improvement from Partners in Time's boss fights especially. To be clear, most of the boss gimmicks in Partners in Time I'm a huge fan of, and I think there's plenty of variety there. The issue comes in with how Partners in Time is almost too good at letting your mastery of Bros items crush a major boss battle in a matter of 4 minutes. I love the Shrewboid Brat, for instance. It reminds me a lot of Thousand Year Door in that the audience is an active participant in the fight. What sucks is that on my recent playthrough, I barely saw its full arrangement of attack patterns because I used 2 pocket chomps and only saw it attack 3 times. I never even saw it throw its lollipop, you know, its signature weapon. This isn't entirely a bad thing, per se. As I've said, I really admire how Partners in Time lets you school whoever you run into, but it admittedly leads to the climax of an area dissipating far too quickly to feel like a very big deal. Since Bowser's Inside Story limits your capacity for damage with almost all of the special moves, the structure of each boss fight, in most cases, is able to maintain itself no matter how good you are at the game. Of course, the special moves are no less fun to pull off and are as creative as they've ever been. It's just nice that it doesn't mean that a built-up encounter will be over in 3.5 minutes if you're good enough. I mean, that didn't stop it from happening a time or two. I was actually really looking forward to fighting the Junker again on this playthrough, and I never saw it attack once because I killed it with 2 attacks, so that's pretty unfortunate. I haven't been highlighting the core combat for the brothers much, and it's mostly because the tweaks to their combat style are more subtle this time around. The double jump from Partners in Time has been retained as a core part of their moveset, Bros attacks return as well as SP, and this game was the first in the series to attempt to increase character customizability via the badges. The Bros equip 2 badges together to create a specific perk you can take advantage of if you get enough excellent attacks to fill up the meter. It is a fantastic incentive to keep up your attack accuracy no matter what. You don't use up a turn when you spend the perk, so you can essentially get a free HP or SP refill or get charged up for a super attack. That last one is especially responsible for just how easily you can wreck a major boss battle once you unlock the Magic Window or Falling Star special attacks. Speaking of special attacks, attack pieces make their series debut in this game. They're essentially a new method of unlocking Bros attacks, making a lot of them technically optional if you're not the type to explore. If you like having fun though, they're basically a scavenger hunt for 10 puzzle pieces that all combine into a new technique for the brothers to use. It's a fun mechanic that gives you a great reason to travel to every corner of each region. I love that the devs essentially went and made unlocking special moves into a minigame. It's very in character with the series' identity. The only thing is, Alpha Dream seemed to have a bit of trouble naturally implementing 10 unique pieces into each area. You'll sometimes receive half of the pieces from one block minigame in a way that can only make me think that someone had to have gone, yeah, whatever, just put half of them in a block, it's fine. The selection of Bros attacks in this game is particularly bountiful, with you having 2 different playstyles to use. Bowser's minion special attacks all utilize the touchscreen in some form, from furiously tapping on every Goomba in sight and probably missing half of them, or frantically scrubbing Broggy to crush your foes with an armada of blitties. Of course, the Bros are still doing their own thing as they were in previous games. My favorites this time around have to be the Snack Basket, Magic Window, and Falling Star. They all just feel incredible to pull off correctly. But of course, how could I forget the giant battles with Bowser? Every now and again, Bowser will find himself on the brink of death, and the brothers have to resuscitate him as a wannabe Godzilla for a special boss fight. You flip the DS on its side using an animation that makes it seem way cooler than it probably is, and you end up having a spectacle fight with some equally giant monster utilizing the stylus and the DS microphone. Even on genuine hardware though, I never got the flame attack to work well without sounding as though I was having a stroke. This is just about the only thing in this game that sucks. Or I guess blows in this case. Bruh, what is happening? Ah! Overall though, these giant battles can spice up the gameplay every now and again, and despite being slower, they thankfully don't overstay their welcome, unlike a certain other game who tried its hand at the same thing. I've hardly touched on the aesthetics here, but this is my pick for the best looking Mario and Luigi game easy. I'd actually even go a step further and say that this is one of the best looking games of all time. Yeah, 240p system and everything, but the sprite work, animations, color palette, and the numerous different battling backgrounds have hardly lost their appeal with age. The thick black outline around the characters makes them pop out against the environment in a way that I feel creates a compelling contrast. It makes every movement of the characters feel eye-catching and noteworthy, making way for even more of the incredible expressions and animation work you saw in previous entries. Bowser's design and character work in this game is easily my favorite portrayal of him in the entire Mario series. In future games and the remakes, there's something that makes him look too gruff and bloated in size and generally just too angry to me. In previous games, he looked fine enough, but again was mostly taking part in a scene if he was made to get angry or embarrassed. This design for Bowser had to be more versatile with him being a playable and main character. He's just a tad slimmed down, but still perfectly beefy and spiky. A lot of Bowser's expressions in this game are never seen in the same light in any other Mario games, be them RPG, mainline, or otherwise. This iteration of Bowser can look genuinely happy, or confused, or lost in thought. I mean, damn it, he's a big doofus, but it makes him so endearing when utilizing this design. The environments, too, are all uniquely colored, vivid, and unlike any other environments found before or after, even while just working with being in the Mushroom Kingdom again. Bowser's body, even, has plenty of varied abstract areas despite all being confined to the theme of a single person's gross insides. Bowser's inside story is already essentially perfect for the first 90% of the game, but it's the final hours that really kick it up to masterpiece territory. If you remember anything about this game, it's how it ends. The atmosphere of Peach's castle and Bowser's airway are quite grim for a Mario game. It's easily the darkest the color palette gets across the board, and the music is, as always, perfection. It will continue to be so until the final seconds of the game. Dark Bowser then appears after Mario and Luigi kick the Dark Star out of Bowser's stomach. While his name may not make him sound threatening, just trust me, he is. Bowser has already proven that nothing Fawful has thrown his way is capable of keeping him down, but having the enigmatic concept of evil craft a form equal to him in skill is possibly the most effective way to heighten the stakes at this point. Do I even need to say it? Do I need to tell you that this final battle may very well be, unironically, one of the best finales to any video game? Do I need to describe how perfectly it's set up, how foreboding that final conversation between Starlo and Bowser is, and how badass it is that the fight starts with both Bowsers spitting flames and sparking the midsection of the two DS screens? Do I need to reiterate how brilliantly this fight pushes to the limit every mechanic, aside from spitting fire, you've put into practice over the course of this entire journey? I don't need to say it, but at the same time, I do. I've highlighted and will continue to highlight Yoko Shimomura's contribution to creating such an enriching atmosphere for this series, but this final boss track may be my favorite thing she's ever composed for Mario and Luigi. It still amazes me to this day how she can manage to work this kind of magic and create this kind of atmosphere, even when constrained by the DS's sound hardware. It doesn't stop her for a damn second. My heart will always belong to its predecessor, but that doesn't keep me from loving Bowser's inside story just as passionately. If I had to point you to the best game in the series, you're looking at it right here. If you can find any way to play this game on a DS or 3DS, that's easily the best way you can play it. I didn't get my 3DS capture card shipped back to me while I was recording for this video, which was very unfortunate for a series that takes place almost entirely on DS and 3DS, but you'll see in my footage just how poorly I executed my jump helmets, snack baskets, and Shy Guy Squad attacks. Having the two screens laid out properly, and especially having a genuine stylus for Bowser's special moves, is unfathomably superior to using a mouse cursor via my Nintendo personal computer. For better and worse, this game was made to be played on the DS family of systems. I love the Mario RPGs, evidently, and I have yet to play even close to all of them, but I don't feel any hesitation calling this the best one. The verdict is always changing as far as which game is the most creative or unique of the bunch, but as far as it goes for execution, I really don't see where this game goes wrong. Its biggest and only major problem I can think of is how it uses the DS microphone in such a way that will make you lightheaded. If that's the worst thing I can say about a game that tries so many innovative things, I don't see how I could call it anything but one of the best games ever made. I was just the slightest bit nervous going into Dream Team. Once again, I was venturing back into new territory, and I had no real idea whether it was going to disappoint me or pleasantly surprise me. This is easily the longest Alpha Dream developed Mario and Luigi game, and I didn't know how to feel about that. A crucial appeal of this series for me is that you're never doing anything for too long. I'd go as far as to say that's one of the most important pillars that the Mario RPGs hold over the rest of the genre. In the brilliant words of Sabotage Studios' Terry Bollinger when asked about the development behind Sea of Stars, everything is done before the player is. Initially, I found my hesitation was validated. The introductory segment on Pillow Island was quite lengthy, and it unfortunately felt that way too. Before reaching your first proper dungeon with Mario and Luigi, there were over 40 minutes worth of NPCs to talk to, quizzes and minigames to play, and tutorials to skim through. I was taking my time and fiddling with a few settings in Citra, but Bowser's Inside Story, by comparison, only took 25 minutes to get into your first proper encounter with both brothers. It took 22 minutes in Partners in Time and 19 minutes in Superstar Saga. I would also make the argument that Dream Team's opening areas are less interesting than the first few you saw in the previous games, and I'm speaking solely of that opening stretch before you enter a proper fight with Luigi and your party. This isn't to say the areas themselves don't work, rather comparing it to Dream Team's predecessors reveals a somewhat dull first impression. You go to the airstrip where your blimp lands and Pillow Castle. They don't look exactly the same by any stretch, but they do share an affinity for the color gray, not to mention how they're easily the least creative and least visually appealing locales Dream Team has on offer. Partners in Time doesn't earn any points for making you skip through the same basic tutorial twice in a row, but by the time you can use Luigi in that game, you had already seen Peach's Castle in the past, Peach's Castle in the present, open lush grasslands, and sunset-backed mushroom towers, all in a much shorter time frame, might I add. I wouldn't call Dream Team's intro boring, but it definitely feels dragged out if you played the previous entries. I mean, the first and only quiz in the game is just reminding you of the whopping 2 proper nouns you've been introduced to thus far, Pillow Island and Dr. Snoozemore. I welcome minigames in this series, but having one pop up this early for something so redundant feels unnecessary. That's not to say the intro doesn't offer intrigue for the wider story, however. The introduction to the Zkeeper as the island's deity and the wealth of returning and brand new faces was already grabbing my attention. I was thrilled to see Yoshi's, Bean Bean residents, Brock's, and Shelltops all hanging out together in the opening hub. I actually had no idea Bean Bean citizens returned, and I found it so heartwarming that they didn't completely disappear after Fawful did. The Hooligans even spiritually returned via the Hooskies. Yeah, that was a very regular sentence. All of this, and Dream Team still took the time to introduce its own brand new species and key characters to the Mario canon. Man, were these the days or what? I'll never understand why Nintendo is so dead set on Toads being the dominant NPC in projects involving Paper Mario. I'll just never get it. This diversity of beings in Dream Team's intro alone silently sells you on how great a vacation spot Pillow Island is. The fact that you're seeing people from all across the Mushroom and Bean kingdoms on top of the lore of Pillow Island itself creates a hub that feels as though it's a melting pot stuffed to the britches with history. Like the Bean kingdom before it, it slots in so naturally to the Mario canon that it's a shame it doesn't get acknowledged in mainline Mario games. Like, come on, Nintendo, at least give us a Mario Kart track or something. I went through most of my life believing that Partners in Time never got acknowledged by any future Mario games aside from Bowser's Inside Story, so I almost leapt for joy seeing how many times Dream Team did so. I didn't know Kylie Koopa ever came back. That was a pleasant surprise, to be sure. Although, I do think it's a tad strange how she and Popple both don't remember Mario and Luigi. I mean, I think their likeness ought to ring a few bells, right? I mean, Popple is such a whack job that I could buy that he's seen enough interesting things in life or possibly suffered some kind of head trauma and forgot about them, but Kylie Koopa? I'm having trouble believing you could be so heavily involved in a plot to reclaim the Mushroom Kingdom and forget the group of people responsible for actually saving it, not to mention saving her life from being a mushroom forever. It's not a huge deal or anything, I just find it to be strange, but it's great for them to return in any capacity. I'd actually go as far as to say that Dream Team is a much better celebration of Mario and Luigi than Paper Jam is of any Mario RPG, but we'll get to that conversation before long. Once you actually start properly playing, Dream Team hits the ground running. Badges are introduced much sooner than they were in Bowser's Inside Story, which is much better than having to wait for 4 hours. Thanks to its earlier introduction, the number of badges you have access to can trickle in more gradually and can be bought at more than one shop. Over the course of the game, you'll find yourself using different badges, whereas in Bowser's Inside Story, I never saw any reason to switch off of the two that I bought in Toad Town. The ability to swap badges mid-battle was something I'd never thought to use in the previous game, but I found myself compelled to in Dream Team. Netting various perks to line up and use in succession is one of the many great ways Dream Team encourages, and in many cases demands you to perfect your execution during battles to fill up that bar as much as you possibly can. Dream Team then introduces an absolutely genius addition, Expert Challenges. This is an achievement system that rewards you for performing well in battle, landing excellent attacks, dodging and countering enemies, etc. It's such a brilliant way to even further push you to perform your best at all times in tandem with the badge meter. Now, even if you are a master at dodging enemies, you have a different goal to shoot for beyond ending the fight as quickly as possible. You can even net some okay at best gear from these challenges. I nevertheless found it intrinsically rewarding enough to check those boxes off the list that I got all of them. It's no easy feat, and I doubt I'll ever do it on a repeat playthrough, but there's something to be said about how good it felt to say that I mastered the game. Dream Team generally has an inconsistent quality to it. For instance, by the 9 to 10 hour mark, I was beginning to realize that I was roughly 2/3 of the way through Superstar Saga by that same point in runtime, and was evidently nowhere near that far into Dream Team. The dozing sands were genuinely putting me to sleep with how long it took to get through. There were so many pillows to save, rocks to drill, not to mention getting the 10 consecutive dodges achievement was by far the most annoying one yet, and the theming of the area on top of all of this just wasn't doing much for me. Then, immediately after that, you go to Wakeport, which may be my favorite town in the entire Mario and Luigi series. I instantly fell in love with its music and just how layered the town itself is in regards to exploration. I love when even the towns in RPGs are their own sandboxes for you to rummage around in, and this was easily the best one in the series in that respect. I can tell the first song I'll listen to when I go on vacation somewhere is going to be Wakeport's theme. It fits that situation perfectly. Really, the entire soundtrack may be the highest quality selection in the franchise. This game has hits galore, with Wakeport's theme being among my favorites. The atmosphere was delicious, there were so many cute NPCs to talk to and plenty of rooms and buildings to familiarize myself with. Not to mention it contains the cutest fetch quest I've ever experienced, culminating in this Husky asking his girlfriend to marry him. I found that Dream Team oscillates between those two extremes somewhat regularly. 1 minute you'll be questioning how Alpha Dream is still throwing so many pillows at you who share such a similar set of puzzles between each other. The next you'll find one of the most creative and bustling locales that you want to comb over even more thoroughly than you were while exploring everywhere else. I don't want to say that there should be some mandate on how long one of these games can be. However, I do think this series lends itself much better to being 15 to 20 hours long over the 37 hours it took for me to nearly 100% Dream Team. How is that even possible, you may be asking? I think it's pretty apparent that the 3DS afforded Alpha Dream a sizable jump in power from the original DS, and they accordingly put their everything into making this the biggest Mario and Luigi game yet. In terms of scale, the number and size of rooms is greatly increased from Bowser's Inside Story, and again, I would like to direct you to my playtime for each game. Bowser's Inside Story, 20 hours and 22 minutes, versus Dream Team, 36 hours and 54 minutes. I would like to add that my playthrough of Bowser's Inside Story includes me combing over the main hub searching for every bean location as Mario and Luigi, only resorting to a guide once. Really, the only side content I didn't bother with in both games was the maximum ranks of the score attack minigames in the boss fight arenas, yet still the runtime is almost doubled between the two. I don't mean to say all of this as though playing Dream Team isn't fun, because it is fun. My only major beef with it, aside from the massive bros, naturally, you can't get any beefier than them, is that I found myself ready to move on from each area by the time I was roughly 3/4 of the way through. It can definitely begin to wear on you by the time you reach the end game. I feel like if you trimmed down these areas by like 25% or so, they would be the ideal length so as to never wear out their welcome. Again, I refer you to that quote, everything is done before the player is. I think the previous games all did so expertly, and Dream Team, by comparison, has a very hard time knowing when to move on. In Bowser's Inside Story, the ratio of Bowser segments to Mario and Luigi segments were not only fairly balanced, but they also stayed largely separate until you went out into the hub world as the brothers. When you played as Bowser, the only time you really had to use the bros was for inhaling enemies during combat, and as the bros you only needed Bowser to move somewhere so you could solve a few puzzles. In other words, the two didn't bleed together in such a way that made you sick of either gameplay style. Dream Team, by contrast, has the typical 3D overworld segments filled to the brim with pillows and Dream World mini-dungeons to complete, which in turn makes the dedicated Dream World segment afterwards feel fatiguing. Wait, I just finished saving like 8 pillows in the Dozing Sands, and now I need to complete another 50-minute dungeon featuring the same music and visual assets I've been seeing intermittently for the past 2 hours? The Dream World is the key gimmick of this game, and it would be terrible if this idea didn't get any sufficient exploration because a decent number of the Dream World segments are substantively unique from each other, and a lot of them are fun. I find that the balance of the two gameplay styles is lopsided, however, and it's unfortunate that it can water down what is otherwise a game brimming with creativity. This is an aside, but I also found that Dream Team has a bit too strong an attraction towards question mark blocks full of coins. There were so many instances where I was going out of my way to explore somewhere, saw a question mark block, got excited thinking I would get a new piece of gear or maybe a useful item, and then got hit by the realization it's the 10th block in this region full of coins. I'd try and dismiss this as me nitpicking because this is a thing that happens in every Mario and Luigi game to some degree, but in Dream Team particularly, it starts to hurt the game's extrinsic incentive to explore when the reward is so often a handful of what feels like nothing after a while. I had this one especially notable instance of this disappointment on Mount Pajamaja. I was in the westmost room in the snowy segment, clearing the spike hazards with the massive bros when I mistimed a spin jump and saw the wind carry them south away from this corner, housing a question mark block. I couldn't push them back on account of the wind, so I got excited, wondering what could be hidden in an easily missable spot like that. I went through the whole room a second time, properly timed the spin jump, and leapt into a state of wondrous bliss, realizing it was 10 fucking coins. On a much more positive note, though, the goal of saving the pillows from petrification is a greatly effective motivator to explore everything on Pillow Island, such that I never doubted for a second that I was going to save all of them, no matter how long it took. These little guys and gals are absolutely adorable. Really, I think it's just a testament to Alpha Dream's ability to make absolutely anything under the sun adorable. 2 mustachioed men in their mid-20s? Heart-mending. Sentient pillows with ears and faces? Heart-melting. Prince Dreambert? Soul-healing. All you really need to do to make your game fun to complete is make every goal feed back into helping someone or something cute. Instant money. The process of saving said pillows, on the whole, is fun, with a few drawbacks. I enjoy the dream battles, however, I found them to be slightly less fun than the typical Mario and Luigi combat. On the one hand, I do think it's interesting having the single brother to worry about in the way of dodging and countering enemies. Having the 4 directions to aim the hammer as well as those hallway chases are fun new iterations on the tried and true mechanics used since Superstar Saga. None of these battles feel quite like anything we've seen from the series before, and having area of effect damage from one hammer strike or jump attack can be greatly satisfying. On the other hand, it sometimes felt like the area of effect damage off of said attacks would end up doing jack, all the while taking longer than the same move would in the real world. I unfortunately also found that enemy attacks could end up taking a great deal of time in both dream and real world battles, significantly longer than any of the attacks in the previous games outside of boss fights. It's a more prominent issue in dream battles though when the number of enemies is significantly greater. While I do appreciate the increase in enemy numbers leading to more grandiose attacks from both sides, it can make some standard encounters drag on for far too long. Some of the attacks in this game can go on for upwards of 45 seconds, I'm not joking. This is also not taking into account the fact that if you suffer a status ailment like Dizzy and it leads to another status ailment, you can get hit by a clusterfuck of moves back to back and die because you failed one counter and got hit by potentially 20 different enemies at once with no other party member to help you recover. Technically, this could happen in Bowser's Inside Story as well, but you would be looking at a maximum of like 2 hits that you couldn't do anything about. I literally couldn't even find footage of dizziness making me tank any more than 1 additional hit in previous games. This is not a recurring problem, to be clear, and you can work around it with the status immunity gear, but the sheer number of enemies in dream battles ends up being a real mixed bag. I nevertheless found Bowser to be a substantially more interesting alternative gameplay style over having just one Mario Bro who's souped up a little bit. The highlight of these dream battles for me was the Luigi-nary attacks. With the combat taking place in a dream world with never-ending possibilities, you get to command your army of Luigis and do some of the nuttiest special moves in the series. Rolling up a Luigi Katamari, building a Luigi tower, as well as creating an extinction-level threat. The other major aspect of the dream world is the Zelda-esque mini-dungeons you explore and solve puzzles in. You find absolutely no shortage of interesting new gimmicks to play around with. The sheer number of Luigi-nary abilities is impressive, and they put a lot of them to creative use. Using Luigi's mustache as a slingshot, changing the direction of gravity, switching platforms by sneezing, spinning Mario around a drill, stacking Luigis on top of each other, rolling Luigis into a massive Katamari again, making a Luigi hookshot? You know what? I take back every complaint. This game is perfect. My only tiny little gripe is that going from controlling Mario with the buttons and then switching to the touchscreen to fiddle around with Luigi is not as seamless as it was to switch to Bowser in the previous game. Previously, it was move brothers into position, click a button, move Bowser, now back to the action. Now it's move Mario into position, pull out the stylus, fiddle around with Luigi, put the stylus down, put your hands back on the buttons, continue as you were. It doesn't sound like a big deal, and if I'm honest, it probably isn't anyway, but it does add up over the course of the game, especially when you get to some of the more repetitive Dream World gimmicks like switching gravity. That's Dream Team's Achilles heel, unfortunately. There are just a few too many things that take just a little bit too long, and it all compiles up to feel like a massive problem. You complete the Ultabed quest thinking, oh yeah baby, let's wake up that Z-Keeper and storm Bowser's castle, only to find that you need to reach the peak of Somnom Woods in order to go to bed in the correct location so your dream power is as strong as possible. It's a beautiful location. Its theme somehow rides this perfect line between serenity and intensity, with it being the last major landmark on your trip across Pillow Island. I'm a sucker for gloomy and overcast woodland areas like this. Above anything else, this place is an excellent showcase of how good this entire game looks, hardware restraints be damned. The area goes through a drastic visual progression too as you climb higher up. It's awesome. But then you reach the peak after roughly 3 hours if you're after all the beans and pillows, only to find that you have another dream area to trek through for another hour. I hate undercutting all of this game's best moments as if being too long ruins them in their entirety, especially as someone after the game's collectibles. It's hard to enthusiastically endorse Dream Team though when this problem pervades the experience on a regular basis. I'm grateful to say that the game's writing is thankfully strong enough to give you meaty nuggets of joy at regular intervals. The comedic heart of these games is alive and well. In fact, Dream Team is possibly the funniest game in the series. I ended up laughing out loud several times. What the fuck? The narrative is largely enjoyable and features plenty of lovable and memorably designed NPCs like Prince Dreambert, the Z-Keeper, the Massive Bros, Britta, those goofy-ass seahorses at Dreamy Driftwood Shore, the funny little dudes in Dreamy Wakeport, and the list goes on. Dreambert is chiefly the strongest newcomer who unwaveringly has his mind on his companions and won't relax until they're saved. He's a candidate for my favorite original character in the series. I love him. Every now and then he can be goofy, but he's always got his heart on what matters. As previously stated, the main goal of the game being to destroy nightmare fragments to save the pillows is a flawless motivator to push you through every Dreamworld chunk, whether mandatory or optional. I think what makes it so compelling is the fact that the damage has already been done. Surely Antasma is going to make things even worse, but an entire race of beings was considered extinct because of the previous nightmare cataclysm. It's impossible to not feel like a complete asshole for leaving a pillow trapped in a nightmare purgatory forever because you're the only two Italian plumbers who can save the day. All of that said, I think the biggest disappointment in the story lies with Antasma and Bowser. I think it's most apparent at this point in the series how it can't help but shove Bowser into the slot for the final boss fight every single time, and it's irritating in this case because Antasma looks awesome! He has a commanding design, he looks scary, for sure somebody who would give me nightmares as a kid, and he's a Dream Team and Pillow Island exclusive character. I wanted there to be more backstory or motivation behind him instead of relegating him to be the guy who gets cucked by Bowser at the last second. That Mount Pajamaja Dream Beats trick was the only time I could take the two of them seriously as a combined threat. I especially wish the final battle was against both of them at once and not just fighting them individually. Again, it feels like the game doesn't know when to end something before it's overstayed its welcome and makes you go through two separate final boss battles. Like, imagine a combined version of these two battles where you go through phases fighting Antasma in the dream world and then switch to fighting Bowser in the real world. Not only would it be measurably more satisfying to face off against the two of them at once as the Dream Team, as it were, but it would also be something actually interesting instead of fighting Bowser except big and sparkly. I've gotta say, the game did not help itself by throwing in a giant battle with Bowser just before all of this. I'm going to be frank, this fight is a contender for the worst segment in the series for me. Like the root of every other problem I have with Dream Team, this fight takes way too long and ruins any potential excitement you would have going into the proper final boss fights. How excited am I supposed to get about fighting Bowser for this game's big finale when I just did it less than an hour ago? Once again, I was already prepared to take on Phantasma and Bowser by the time I was 75% of the way through Neo Bowser Castle. Having to do another giant battle felt completely exhausting. This battle came close to making me throw in the towel on beating the game altogether, actually. The Simu Hook gyroscope tracking on Citra is, to put it bluntly, awful for this game's use of motion controls. What that means is that even after playing near perfectly for 10 minutes per attempt, I would get to the shell deflection segment and get f***ed over because the gyroscope tracking would just break. Then they hit me with the fake out death in that final flying star segment, and it broke on me again and I died immediately after. This was easily the angriest I've gotten playing any of these games. I was so over it. It didn't help that I also forgot that emulators have save states. Let me clarify, it's not entirely the game's fault, but this battle still takes way too long regardless, and God help you if you die and have to start over. It's a shame that a segment like this will only be properly played on the original hardware. I doubt I even need to say it, but play this game on a genuine 3DS, specifically because the giant battles will completely screw you on an emulator. I feel bad. I've done a lot of complaining about this game, but I feel the need to clarify that I don't think Dream Team is boring holistically. I think the mediocre pacing is more an unfortunate side effect of having so many unique ideas crammed into this one game. This game has so many unique Dreamworld puzzles, NPCs, bros moves, Luiginary abilities, bros attacks, enemies, and so many tutorials walking you through all of them. If you're looking for the best bang for your buck out of the Mario and Luigi games, I don't think this game is worth any less than its launch price of $40. You have a substantial amount of game to get through here. I think all of this does, unfortunately, come with the cost of being less exciting compared to the first 3 games. Yeah, Partners in Time may have essentially no side content, and it doesn't utilize its full potential with the time travel mechanics, but the longest area to complete in the game is its final dungeon, which only took 2.5 hours to reach the credits upon entering. There's never a dull moment, and that aspect of it goes a long way towards making it my favorite in the franchise. That's just it though. If you enjoy a more relaxed adventure, I could absolutely see why Dream Team would be someone's favorite game in the series. It's not as if Dream Team feels padded, at least outside of the Ultimate quest. This game has so much creativity bursting out of it that it makes Paper Jam look shameful by comparison. I'm convinced that Alpha Dream went so hard on this game that by the time they had to make Paper Jam, they were just like, well, hopefully we'll think of something interesting along the way. I know this section has come off far more negative than the previous ones, and again, I feel bad about it because Dream Team's spirit is pure, innocent, and lovable. I hope it doesn't discredit the fact that I still had a great time playing Dream Team and would not dissuade anybody from playing it unless you're on the fence about the series. All I would say is that you should be absolutely certain that you love the Mario RPG combat systems and sense of humor if you're going to try this game. As long as that's the case, hell yeah, this game deserves the love. Fact is, I may have gotten impatient with it, but I still filled out the entire achievement list, rescued all the pillows, and dug up all the beans. My investment in the game held true to the end. Again, I hate to have complained so much like it makes this game any worse than my precious childhood favorites because Dream Team is in so many ways a step forward for the Mario and Luigi games. It transitioned the series into proper 3D environments but still maintains charming, expressive characters. It celebrates the series' history and harbors nothing but love for its predecessors. It still carves its own identity with new characters, locations, and twists. It still features a soundtrack composed by Yoko Shimomura, which is to say, it's peak. Plus, this game is still probably more consistently fun to play than like 90% of the non-Mario RPGs I've played. Keep in mind, running up against the previous 3 games is like trying to beat the Massive Bros at a beef-off. It's no easy feat. To say it's my least favorite of these 4 games in a league all of their own is not calling it a bad time, not even close. When I inevitably replay all of these games down the line, I will not hesitate to jump right back into Dream Team, and if you haven't played it yet and you're a fan of Mario and Luigi, go for it. At the end of the day, all that I can really ask of these games is that there's a heart and joyful soul driving the experience forward. For all the problems I had with it, Dream Team is nothing if not a game that's full of heart.
Mario, is he going to hit start or what?
I don't know, I can't hold up my arm much longer.
Is he okay? He hasn't blinked in several minutes.
Does he even blink on the title screen, Luigi?
Wait. Oh my god. Oh, this is a bad sign, Mario.
So the cat's out of the bag on this one. I've been taking some shots at this game here and there, but at the end of the day, Paper Jam is fine. Fine in the sense that it is a functioning video game and that when you're playing it, it's decent fun. Of course, fine for Mario and Luigi standards is not a flattering descriptor, and I've got a heap of complaints with this game and how it turned out. Before we get into it though, I want to clarify that I aim my criticism at the game, not at the people who made it. The people who made the game are human beings who were doing their jobs as instructed with however much time they were given. I cannot fault them for it, and I respect this team of devs especially for crafting my favorite RPG series on the planet. I would rather not rip into something that dozens of creative people had to spend years of their lives in order to make, believe it or not. In the case of Paper Jam, it seems apparent that Alpha Dream's staff was clearly fatigued after years of non-stop work on each new entry. It also seems evident Paper Jam was forced under, or at the very least was influenced by, the Mario Mandate, as many seem to call it. For those who aren't aware, some developer interviews on various Mario games developed in the 2010s, especially the RPGs, corroborate the idea that the higher-ups at Nintendo during this period were more or less demanding that Mario games all look exactly the same with little to no unique character designs or inventive stories. Toadsworth is notably not in this game, for example, despite being in every prior game at Peach's side for every second she isn't being held captive. The only Toads you'll see in this game are the same generic, color-swapped Toads you would see in a new Super Mario Bros. Game. A mustache is allegedly too much to add to one of these guys. Any unique physical characteristic is too much for whatever reason. I'm honestly shocked they allowed Nabbit to be in this game. The more you look at Paper Jam, the more it seems evident something was going terribly wrong at Alpha Dream during this game's production. The fact that they had to scale back the story in rewrites is evident by the fact that the vivid spirit of the franchise feels like a distant memory in Paper Jam. There is no better way to tell than by noting how there is not a single originally designed character in this game. None whatsoever. Moreover, from a crossover perspective, the game doesn't even scratch the stratosphere of interesting characters it could have brought back to make the premise half as interesting as its potential makes it seem. Imagine if Popple, Phantasma, Grubba, Count Bleck, and Bowser teamed up in this game. Think of how many different abilities or conflicts you would have to work with as a writer. You wouldn't need to introduce anything 100% new in Paper Jam, and that would have had the potential to be a crazy story. No, we instead have a series of conversations that essentially boil down to characters talking to themselves. Any arguments said pairs of characters have with each other feel entirely redundant, sometimes in a humorous way, but oftentimes just in a tedious one. Bowser and Kamek are the only two pairs that consistently argue with each other. Everybody else may as well just be monologuing at the camera. The only consistently clashing personalities in this game are, unfortunately, Luigi and Starlo, resulting in what is, by far, the most mean-spirited and outright unpleasant portrayal of Starlo, or really any character in a Mario RPG. It's always been a recurring joke in this series that Luigi's a bit clumsy, scaredy, and silly compared to Mario. I'm not going to tell you I rolled in my chair with laughter every time these games made a joke of this ilk, but there was at least a very clear effort to demonstrate in that same breath that Luigi was also every bit as valuable to the dynamic duo as Mario was. He got his own chance to shine and bail his brother out in what's only shown to be a fierce declaration of how greatly he cares to protect Mario. There's this one example in Partners in Time that demonstrates this idea better than anything in Paper Jam. The Shrine Gate gaslights Luigi in an attempt to urge Mario to come to his defense, thus resulting in them progressing further after affirming that Luigi is invaluable to his companions. In Paper Jam, this doesn't happen. Paper Jam straight up belittles Luigi, and not as a one-off joke, it's a consistent idea the game loves bringing up. These jokes come off so much more malicious than they ever have in games past, and it makes me feel like I'm watching someone get bullied and being expected to join in. Starlo is flanderized to be the most one-dimensionally critical and judgmental version of herself in this game. I enjoy her sarcastic, no-nonsense attitude in the other games, but I find it incredibly difficult to appreciate her here when she's picking on Luigi for existing. I would argue Luigi is the most likable character in these games. He has a sense of humor, is wildly expressive, and has a heart of liquid gold. His inclusion as a major character is what makes these games so unique among even the best of the other Mario RPGs. Starlo does not feel the same. She will make fun of Luigi at every point possible. It's such an intensely unwarranted side to her that becomes more prominent in Paper Jam than it ever has been. It was also very cool of Paper Jam to have Luigi be the only character who exists in both Paper Mario and Mario and Luigi who doesn't interact with his alternate self. No, Paper Luigi gets the honor of being locked in the music room and is omitted from the story entirely. This game is the poster child for what the supposed Mario mandate resulted in, an era of Mario games that all looked and felt the same. I respect the idea behind keeping a coherent style across the Mario series. That being said, none of these games deserve to be forced to match the exact same aesthetics. It's a surefire way to make people lose investment in the new games when there's nothing visually distinct setting them apart. I may have been a little tough on Dream Team, but to say that my big problem with that game sprouted from the fact that there were identifiable and unique characters and locations is about as off base as you could be. At the end of the day, no matter what problems I have with that game, as a creative person myself, I would never vilify it because it brings so many novel ideas to the table, and that's what counts to me. That's worth infinitely more than any brand-consistent vision. Listen to me. I think I like Toad more than the average person. In Mario Party, if he's in the game, he's my main guy. Hell, he was a part of my old username. Yeah, I know, it's cringy. I made it when I was 12, alright? I think if there's anybody who likes this silly little fella, it's me. If even I get sick of seeing a bunch of featureless Toads in Paper Jam, I don't want to know how painful it must be for people who hate him. I would be willing to bet my entire life savings, so $5, that not a single soul on this planet played one of the early Mario RPGs and went, yeah, you know, man, I tried playing Thousand Year Door, but I just couldn't get into it with how many unique and colorful characters there were. It really took me out of it. Mind you, I'm not asking for something different out of the RPGs. I am literally just asking them to keep doing what they've done since Mario's first RPG. This Mario Mandate, as series fans call it, however real or fake it was, is like a strike against creativity in a franchise that only got where it is for its groundbreaking approach to game design. The RPGs were just the same for their willingness to go against the grain. All of that is to say, these were the circumstances that made Paper Jam bring to life such an unremarkable take on the Mushroom Kingdom. It's not an approach entirely devoid of benefit, however. With no new locales to exposit on or detail, Paper Jam is thankfully able to start faster than any Mario and Luigi game yet, mechanically speaking. I'm talking you can use a bros attack in your first battle levels of speed here. It's refreshing that finally, 5 games in, they let you skip nearly every tutorial too. You automatically have the hammer to start, you get your full party in less than an hour with a unique new character, and you can demo or practice any move you want whenever you want, even during battles. If the story actually had anything interesting going for it, I would have no issue calling this one of the best intros in the series. There's this meme in the Xenoblade fandom, I know, what a horrible way to start a paragraph, of someone running in a straight line for 30 seconds without having anything to interact with. It's something of a gag on the common criticism of Xenoblade 1's level design being barren. It's often big solely for the sake of being big and not because it makes the game better. I agree partially with this criticism myself, and I also talk about it in more detail in this video, check it out. But I think that game's scale being so massive is important to sell you on the world. There's a purpose, but it comes with the trade-off of wasting the player's time when you go off the beaten path for any reason. Paper Jam is the closest I could find to a Mario and Luigi equivalent of this clip. I'm mostly joking. It's not unbearable to get around in Paper Jam by any means. Dashing and weaving through the areas is fast enough to feel satisfying, and I enjoyed using the trio moves a lot. They permit you to explore each location in new ways from the former games, and I especially appreciate the trio drill and glide for that. However, compare Paper Jam to another Mario and Luigi game, and it showcases significantly less charm and detail in each of its rooms. I wouldn't mind this inherently if these places were memorable in some way, but it's basically New Super Mario Bros. As an RPG. What hurts extra badly is how even the enemies you find are the same you would see in a 2D Mario platformer. Dimblewood may just be your typical forest region, but at the very least it has completely original enemies from the rest of the Mario series. Even if the location doesn't do much to stand out, the events that happen in it do. It's hard to forget your first giant battle as Bowser. It's displayed in a pretty dramatic, epic manner. Paper Jam's areas not evoking interest on their own is not ideal, but the enemies do nothing to help it either. It's a strange feeling playing a game for 30 hours and feeling as though I have little recollection of memorable landmarks or events in each region. It's not exactly helped by the fact that a lot of your time spent running around in Paper Jam is in the effort of saving hordes of paper toads whilst hearing the same 3 minigame themes over and over again. Minigames and Mario and Luigi are a match made in heaven, but there is a certain ideal balance to be achieved. You shouldn't be doing 5 hours worth of combat and running around, but each minigame should also come up sparsely enough to be a refreshing change of pace and not consist of the entire game. Paper Jam does its best to balance these two halves of the game, but at a certain point you'll feel like the only thing you're doing is chasing paper toads. I think what really hurts it is just the fact that these objectives are more so framed like boxes on a checklist and not a series of narratively compelling events happening in a story. It's not like you work through an area to save a giant clump of paper toads at once. They're almost always presented like this secondary concern, like a side quest. You'll be going through an area to save Peach, and then the Lakitus will fly over and be like, "Hey, there are a lot of toads freaking out over here. You gotta do something about it." I don't know why I gave him this voice. This ends up being frustrating though, considering it is a constant requirement that you save enough paper toads to move on with the story to build a papercraft or some such thing. Despite being presented as this almost optional task, you will have several points in the main story where you have to power through multiple paper toad chases just to move on. Something much worse though is that every story justification for you to go through an area is paper thin, pun intended. Why do we have to go through Sunbeam Plains? So we can go to Bowser's Castle and save Peach. Why bother going to Doop Doop Dunes a second time? Because when you made it to Mount Burr, you actually made no progress whatsoever besides getting this medallion because Peach is now being carried away to Bowser's Castle. We have to go through Doop Doop Dunes to get to Twinsy Tropics so we can open that door to go to Bowser's Castle and save Peach. I've never played a game where the objective was, without exaggeration, boiled down so much on both a micro and macro scale that you're only ever somewhere so you can go to a place in order to get a thing. Previous games didn't have a necessarily complicated motivation for you to keep playing, but they would always give you enough context to make your progress feel purposeful. You go to Chucklehuck Woods in Superstar Saga to find some Chocola Cola to resuscitate Queen Bean. You're going to a place to get a thing, yes, but the context surrounding that objective gives it weight and meaning. You get the idea that saving the queen is a pretty big deal that will aid you in your quest to get Peach's voice back. Once you accomplish this, your goal is now to get the Beanstar to foil Cackleta's plot. I just finished playing Paper Jam, and I can't recall a single reason why you go somewhere beyond trying to save the Peaches or going to Bowser's castle. I find both of these issues to be deeply frustrating because I feel like you could fix both of them potentially if you integrated Paper Toads into the hub world and story more organically. Say you lowered the number of Paper Toads in the game down to 150 or 200 instead of 275, but you make them a more prominent goal in the story. If these Paper Toads were hidden out in the overworld as you're exploring, not only would that further incentivize exploration, but it would create a more tangible sense of natural progress. A lot of these missions are basically hide and seek anyhow. I don't feel like you would have to change that much. It would also better justify each objective on a micro scale. Say a boss waiting for you at the end of a region is holding a massive number of Paper Toads hostage. Now you have something motivating you to push on besides going somewhere so you can get somewhere else. There's more on the line that way. It's not just about beating a boss to move on, it's about helping you work towards something. Keep some of the Lakitu side missions, sure, but wouldn't it theoretically be more meaningful to integrate them in the game like this? I'd certainly find it to be more compelling than Lakitu telling you a bunch of Paper Toads are freaking out and that you need to play a minigame to help them. That way, it doesn't feel like some areas only exist to act as resistance to your progress. You're making progress with some other narrative goal besides getting closer to the end. What's most telling about Paper Jam's structure to me was that while combat was as fun as it's always been, by the time I was halfway through the game, I actively started avoiding enemies if I had already completed their dodge challenge. I wouldn't start doing this in the preceding games, nor the following one, until I already hit the maximum rank or if I was revisiting an area. With so little narrative motivation pushing me forward, it felt like my playtime mostly consisted of battling or chasing Paper Toads. I'm no professional game designer by any means, but I think that's one of the last impressions you would want your turn-based RPG to leave on its players. Paper Jam, at times, seems like it's almost ashamed that it exists. I got this underlying feeling that the game loathes itself, that it's reluctant to have been made. Occasionally, you'll read a few fourth wall poking jokes that amount to the game making fun of itself and the series it's a part of. Starlo takes you aside to bring attention to the door that leads to Bowser's castle and has this monologue about the kinds of adventures that we're on always have some sort of foreshadowing device. Be sure to remember this door for later. This style of comedy was never this on the nose in games past, might I add. Paper Jam will have characters literally look at the camera and make fun of series tropes whilst not doing anything to actually improve on them. The Peaches both get kidnapped, and before it happens they say, "Oh, I guess it's that point in the story then." As RM Alex says in his excellent video on Paper Jam, acknowledging a problem or a trope and fixing or subverting it are two different things. Sure, you can be cheeky and point out that the plot is the most bog-standard Mario fare you could dream up, but this is still the story you chose to tell. Some of the mainline Mario games like Galaxy play a story like this completely straight and manage to yield pretty effective results. Point being, if you're going to break immersion like this to comment on a trope, you probably want to ensure that you're doing something to surpass it instead of just being self-aware for the sake of it. Imagine if this was your first Mario game as a kid and you read one of these passages. You're immediately being told by the game itself to not take what you're seeing seriously. Don't get invested in what you're playing, just have fun. It makes the fast forwarding feature feel less like a quality of life addition and more like a way for the game to beg you to skip its story altogether. I've acknowledged in this video how Mario games, including the RPGs, many of which we've been talking about, are often more focused on being fun as opposed to creating rich, meaningful commentary or themes. That said, these games are all works of art, and you can still find meaning in what you're playing. You may just have to look a little bit deeper than you would for your average RPG. Games like Superstar Saga and Dream Team have stories that promote the idea of traveling to experience new places and learning about foreign cultures. The most memorable characters in those games are often the ones native to the kingdom or island of choice. Your companionship with foreign entities makes you stronger as the journey goes forward. You literally wouldn't be able to complete the game without their help. By the end, it feels genuinely sad that you're leaving these characters and places behind. They're impressing upon you that enriching yourself in this way is valuable. Partners in Time demonstrates the harms of practices like colonialism and environmental destruction. Throughout the game, you see just how many ways the Shroobs have harmed the Mushroom Kingdom and its people, with little idea as to what prompted them to do this. What history the Shroobs have goes unexplored, and they don't care to learn what the Mushroom Kingdom is like either. They're gonna make themselves at home whether you're okay with it or not. The Shroobs don't give you any room to negotiate or make peace with them, so you're only left with the option of fighting their leaders and pushing them out. A decidedly more grim tale. Bowser's Inside Story follows a similar route to Partners in Time, with Fawful deciding to come charging in and claim dominion over the Mushroom Kingdom. There's an underlying message of two opposing sides of the same kingdom coming together and saving the day with their unique strengths combined. Mario and Luigi are constantly gaining intel from being inside Bowser and vice versa. Bowser only unlocks his strongest abilities because of Mario and Luigi meddling around inside his body. The game ends on the note of Peach sending Bowser a cake as a way of thanking him for saving the world, because she knows Mario and Luigi couldn't have done it alone. I wouldn't say the stories were the point of these games existing, but you heard what I said in the intro to this video, right? Why do you think Bowser's Inside Story grabbed my attention when I was younger? It helps that the premise for both games is so wildly unique, even for Mario standards. A game where Mario and Luigi go back in time to meet themselves as babies and fight aliens, and a game where you got to play as and sympathize with Bowser. The premise sounded unlike any other story I had seen before, and even if it's not a cutscene slideshow like other games in its genre, you can still find plenty of lessons and meaning in it. Anyone convinced these games won't say something meaningful should have a word with Brothership. After all, what better demographic is there to impart wholesome messages about companionship to than a general audience? Paper Jam was, I speculate but cannot confirm, forced to be so basic in its premise that any of the broader themes it could have explored have been done before or better in the previous games. Therefore, I imagine the only direction Alpha Dream felt the story could go was to be on the nose about where it comes from. What value is being added to the story by making fun of itself, as opposed to just owning that it's doing another Peach rescue mission? My answer is that this self-deprecation is the flavor Paper Jam is adding to Mario and Luigi. It's pretty routine for Paper Jam to botch some of the most rudimentary elements of RPG or general game design. I've never made a professional game before, so take this all with grains of salt, but my understanding of towns in RPGs, even if I just drew from Mario and Luigi itself, was that every new place you went was supposed to feel different. Your journey across a world had an enriching quality to it. The more you travel, the more you come to understand how everything works. If you went somewhere else, you would pick up on the differences from other places you've already been to. The geography of the region is often a great way to differentiate the townsfolk across each settlement. The natives would behave differently from the natives you interact with elsewhere, while you'd still recognize the familiar elements like merchants or shops where you buy gear and items. Partners in Time doesn't have many densely populated towns, but even it demonstrates this more than sufficiently. Peach's Castle is where you fall back to do your routine gear and item stocking next to the throne room. With this being the tutorial area, nearly all of the toads are describing game mechanics or the layout of the castle. The toads in the library even give you battling tips based on the books they've been reading. How cute. The Gritzy Caves has this one corner shop hosted by two Monty moles that you have to break down a wall in order to enter. You get the idea this shop is primarily for Monty moles, or those who are in the know. One of them even remarks that the least you can do after breaking down the wall is take a look at their gear. You have the two old ladies in Toad Town who are frightened for their life as the only remaining civilians here. Business isn't thriving since nobody's around to buy anything, so they try to guilt trip you into buying something. You even have Fawful's seedy underground equivalent of an alleyway drug deal with his bean and badge shop. Even if, functionally, these all serve the same purpose, there's a character to each place that makes it feel like you couldn't have Fawful's bean and badge out in the courtyard or have a Monty Mole shop on Thwomp Volcano. Each town in Paper Jam is built off of some of the most shameless copy and paste jobs I've seen in any game. Could you tell me where in the Mushroom Kingdom this house is? Mount Burr, obviously. Just kidding, I'm lying. It's from Doop Doop Dunes, but are you seeing the problem here? It's one thing to populate every town with toads and only toads, but they don't even dress differently according to their climate. From blistering winds to scorching deserts and, indeed, the highest bloody room of the tallest bloody tower, they don't look or behave any differently. They may tell you they want to dress differently, but Paper Jam is uninterested in being or looking interesting. You get the sense that the only thing that's different from one town to the next is that you can build a snowman on Mount Burr and that it's hot in Doop Doop Dunes, something that anybody who is anybody could have told you by using their eyeballs. Boss fights in Paper Jam will often unceremoniously begin and end as if they could have been placed anywhere else in the game and it wouldn't have made a difference. The characters rarely ever ruminate on the fight or what progress was made in your victory, you just cleared another obstacle, so keep going. The Chargin' Chucks who threw you in prison come back on your return to Twinsy Tropics. Starlo recognizes as such. This is not built up to in any fashion. There isn't a prior cutscene of Bowser's troops seeing you and giving chase or anything similar, they just show up here. The boss fight itself was pretty fun. I forgot how much I like the Chargin' Chucks. They're kind of cute in a weird way, and the way they'll keep respawning makes for a unique challenge. You defeat them and nobody says a word and you keep going. Why was this happening now and not when you were breaking out of prison in the first place? Because the game has gone a certain length of time without a boss fight, so go fight them. Fun boss battle, I guess, but the context surrounding it is boiled down to the bare minimum explanation of you guys don't like each other, so fight. It feels almost dirty to compare this to Bowser's Inside Story, which features one of the best fights I've ever seen in a game in terms of build-up and payoff. Yanking the Giga Carrot out prompts Wiggler, a native creature to the Dimble Woods, to scold you and force you into a minigame to take responsibility for mindlessly ending several generations worth of work because Bowser thought that this thing was going to make for a good bullet. Wiggler establishes upfront that they have a bonsai bill, which is the only reason Bowser plays along with this in the first place. Upon completing the minigame, Wiggler suddenly suggests that you go and save your progress, a courtesy to the players who struggled with that minigame. This prompt makes you believe something is going to go wrong and that you're going into a boss fight, which soon happens. It happens in a hilarious fashion where Wiggler forgets about the deal and then gets enraged that Bowser ate the Giga Carrot. This enrages Bowser in turn, and possibly the player if that minigame was a pain for them. Bowser then threatens to compost Wiggler's face. You participate in a memorable and well-designed boss battle, and finally, Wiggler gives you the bonsai bill, but not without asking Bowser to please leave the farm. Notice how the minigame itself is largely unnecessary, and that Bowser simply could have confronted Wiggler and ignored that minigame segment altogether, yet it's still one of the best integrated fights in any Mario game. There's a clear goal and narrative justification for the player to do these things, getting the bonsai bill. There's a justification for Wiggler to withhold this from you, seeing as you walked onto their land and did whatever you felt like doing. You maybe even get the idea that Bowser would leave the encounter wanting to be a little more careful of his actions, lest he get himself into more hot water in the future. Your next Mario and Luigi segment happens directly after this cutscene as a result of Bowser eating the Giga Carrot and introducing the Dermite into his body. Notice how events are building on each other. These things can only happen in this order to make sense. There's a logical purpose to what's happening and why it's happening now. Compare that, again, to Paper Jam, where on your way to Gloomy Woods, you run into Paper PD Piranha. Try saying that 5 times fast. Paper PD Piranha, Paper PD Piranha, Paper PD Piranha, Paper PD Piranha, Paper PD Piranha. I don't know, it wasn't that hard, whatever. Starlo remarks that you've already beaten him before, not realizing it was the regular PD Piranha. The unnamed Toad in captivity explains that more paper enemies are popping up left and right, then Paper PD throws him away. Starlo thanks him for moving things along, completely unconcerned for the safety of the civilian, and then you fight. There's a lot of they fight in Paper Jam. After the battle ends, nothing. Genuinely, nothing is said. You don't gain anything, you don't learn anything new, this doesn't build off of or up to anything you didn't already know, and the game doesn't even use the possibility of having that aforementioned Toad be in danger to heighten the stakes. It's literally just they fought. I mean, if you're the type who doesn't enjoy story in video games, I suppose this game was made for you. In the moment, it was never particularly bad for me. I mean, I was enjoying the combat and I liked collecting beans and exploring like I do in every one of these games, but when I try and reflect on what I just played, I end up recounting so little. You best believe when I was playing Superstar Saga, every time I recounted a conversation with Prince Peasley or Popple, I would crack a smile. Same goes for Dreambert, Britta, Brock Monsieur, even Starlo in Dream Team. Same goes for Connie, Arc, Technicky, the Extension Core, Idol, etc. in Brothership. I don't mean to shame anybody who loves Paper Jam, but I don't think it's hard to understand why it doesn't impress in a series that has a pretty high batting average. It's deeply unfortunate how much these things hold Paper Jam back, because every now and then you see something that evokes the exact kind of energy that made this series so beloved. For as much as the Paper Toad missions can often consist of mindless busy work, culminating your efforts of saving them up to building a staircase to the final dungeon is a pretty creative and excellent payoff. If nothing else, it gives the game some spectacle where it desperately needs it and puts into perspective how many different people you've helped up to this point. While the larger plot and overarching jokes in this game aren't winning any awards, plenty of the NPCs have some exhale out of your nose worthy comedic chops. I couldn't commit any of who these people were to memory, being that most of them are toads, but the charm is there, even if only in fleeting moments. In terms of characterization, Toadette is probably the most likable NPC in the game. The victory for women everywhere. I never pinned her for a crafty mad scientist character archetype, but it's cute how stoked she is about inventing and building the paper crafts. Imagine that, creating a unique take on a pre-established Mario character. If I can give Paper Jam credit for anything, it would be that the combat is excellent. Quality of life features like assist mode can be toggled mid-battle. Like in Dream Team, getting a game over will let you switch to easy mode and get this hint block for general combat pointers if you're really stumped. You can even switch to easy mode whenever you want to in the main menu. Paper Jam is a pretty strong contender for the most accessible Mario and Luigi game for newcomers. Being able to demo or practice bros attacks and trio attacks mid-battle is a notably helpful addition that doesn't get in your way if you're practiced, but if you aren't, you can always take some time to master these things in a low-stakes environment. Trio attacks serving as something of an ultimate bros attack makes them feel extra special, especially since only Paper Mario can trigger them. Trio Whirligig and Meteor take too long for my liking, but otherwise I think the fact that these attacks take so much longer helps accentuate the power behind this trio of characters. That whole Mario and Luigi versus Sephiroth debate is pointless. Mario and Luigi will win every time on their own, never mind adding anybody else into that equation. Their combat system is literally designed so that they can avoid any and everything. Buddy doesn't stand a chance. Expert challenges return from Dream Team, and they've been retooled. In Dream Team, the worst achievements by far were the ones that required you to dodge 10 attacks in a row in each area. It was, frankly, too many to string together if you were trying to get that achievement organically as you were exploring. Paper Jam remedies this so that every enemy type has this challenge tied to them, and you need to dodge each of them 5 times in a row. I spammed a lot of Boo Biscuits, like a lot of Boo Biscuits, but it's nevertheless a much more feasible expectation to meet organically. Even if I want every Paper Drybones and Sombrero guy to slip on a banana peel and bonk their heads. That's right, I can be pretty edgy on this channel, forgive me. Each trio and bros attack also asks you to get excellent 5 times in a row, as opposed to Dream Team asking you to do it only once. An extra cherry on top is that the Attackathon and Battle Ring modes have expert challenges to get as well, giving you an external push to try them out. The challenges in Paper Jam are a more well-rounded test of mastery across the whole game. I think it's great that Paper Jam refined them in this way, because this truly is an excellent system for pushing experienced players even further. It helps that the points you earn from expert challenges have a far superior gameplay function this time around. Instead of netting some most likely outdated gear that often made you compromise on stats to utilize their unique perks, Paper Jam lets you save up these points to spend on the gear of your choosing. I love that you now get to see what you're aiming for with each new point threshold. Even if it's a completely optional system to engage with, now you have yet another goal in mind during combat. It makes the harder achievements even more rewarding to complete when you get hundreds of points at once. It means you just significantly closed the gap on buying your next piece of gear. Paper Jam even has a unique customization system from the rest of the series with the deck building mechanic. You select a roster of 10 cards with various effects to help out in battle at the cost of star points, which you earn from landing excellent attacks. I've said it for previous games, I will reiterate it here. This is a perfect secondary goal to make each combat encounter matter to you. It's always building towards something that can benefit you in more critical fights. Moreover, a few of the cards allow you to make some pretty risky moves to potentially great benefit. Chiefly, this card that removes 80% of your HP to gain upwards of 12 star points at once. The potential for challenge runs to customize future playthroughs is tantalizing to think about. Boycotting specific cards, only allowing yourself to use one card per party member rotation, etc. Paper Jam also has 45 different standard enemy types in the game, which is impressive. Granted, that number is inflated by the existence of paper variants of each enemy, but they make clever use of their paper properties to feel noticeably distinct. If the enemy uses projectiles, it's a guarantee that the paper version will throw it slower. Likewise, if a paper enemy goes airborne, you can expect them to take much longer to hit the ground than a regular mook. I love when games like Paper Mario play with the properties of the crafting materials the characters and/or the setting is based on. Aesthetically, mechanically, I pretty much always love it when games play with ideas like Paper Mario being able to flap his arms and hover. Kirby's Epic Yarn is one of my favorite games, a major reason being that it looks fucking gorgeous, even 10 years later because of its commitment to that yarn aesthetic. I feel like you can't draw, animate, program, and implement mechanics around an idea like that if you're phoning it in. Someone or someones clearly put a lot of time and effort into making that look as good as it does. Paper Jam is no different in that regard. Paper Mario's addition to the combat system is neat. However, I find that the enemy attacks in this game are more frustrating to commit to memory than previous games, with you having to independently control 3 characters at once. Partners in Time had 4 party members, yes, but you only had to move 2 of them at any one time, adult brothers for jumping, baby brothers for hammer deflections. It doesn't sound like a lot, but having to keep track of 3 enemy tells instead of 2 can be especially frustrating in a first attempt against a boss when it means you could be facing a party wipe. On the whole, I found Paper Jam was noticeably more challenging than the rest of the series. I want to reiterate that I was skipping significantly more enemies throughout this game compared to my other playthroughs, which does factor into it, but I genuinely wasn't sure I was going to be able to beat the final bosses at my current level. I did, thankfully, but no small portion of that challenge comes from, again, the fact that going from memorizing 2 tells to 3 per enemy is exponentially harder. Still, there is something refreshing about always having to keep your reflexes sharp even in the late game. If challenging combat is something that you look for out of these games, I get the feeling Paper Jam would be a great time, even without a self-imposed challenge run. With the core combat being the most enjoyable part of Paper Jam, on this playthrough I actually bothered getting the maximum ranks on some of the Attackathon and Battle Ring challenges. I didn't play much of these in Bowser's Inside Story or Dream Team for this video, but Paper Jams, again, felt the most doable and fun to try and master of the 3 games. The expert challenges allowing you to purchase gear gave me an external motivation to try these modes out in a way that the previous 2 games didn't. It's something about that checklist in the menu that makes it feel great. I don't know how else to quantify why it works so well for me. I was constantly checking the thing to see what I could do, and it's satisfying to see how many achievements you've gotten as the game progresses. I didn't get all of them this time around, a few of them are far too grindy, but again, this system is my greatest nightmare as a completionist and a genius addition all at once. Papercraft battles exist, I suppose? It's strange. In a way, these are the most mechanically interesting take on the giant battles in this franchise, yet they somehow manage to leave little to any impact. You actually get to freely move around and control your giant kaiju this time, dashing around, knocking other papercrafts over, and crushing your foes. It sounds more interesting than it ends up being in practice, but it is nice that each new papercraft gets a unique mechanic tied to them. It freshens things up a tad. I didn't really feel too strongly one way or the other about these in general, though. They were just fine. Exploration-wise, Paper Jam goes a step further than previous games and even shows you how many blocks you've hit in each region in the main menu. Dream Team showed you your percentage on the final clear screen, but it didn't detail how many blocks you had left. It's kind of funny, by the game's end I felt even more exhausted than I was during Dream Team's finale. For Dream Team, I felt like I had a great time, but I want this game to be done. Paper Jam was more like, I honestly don't even want to be playing this game anymore. Yet, I still had that voice in the back of my head going, well, sure you won't get all of the expert challenges completed, but you can at least S-rank all of the Attack-a-thon minigames. Yeah, alright, I can do that, those are pretty fun. I mean, now that you did that, the least you can do is get the rest of the beans, you almost have all of them anyways. Yeah, I guess you're right. I'll use a guide though. And how couldn't you get the item patches while doing that? I mean, they're pretty easy to spot anyhow.
1 hour later.
By this point, will you really feel satisfied knowing that you forgot 6 blocks and got everything else? No, I won't! Why am I like this? I don't understand it, but some part of me felt so compelled to say that I nearly 100%ed this game, despite being thoroughly done when it came to the main story content. Paper Jam was at its best for me when it stopped even pretending it wanted to tell a story. At least, that way, I could tackle the objectives I wanted to do when I wanted to do them. The most satisfying feeling I had while playing this game was seeing that screen with all 100s on it. I'm not trying to say this as a backhanded compliment. The fact that Paper Jam is still fun, in spite of everything I've complained about here, is genuinely impressive. You best believe, if I was playing any other series and I had this much to complain about in the story department, I wouldn't have finished that game. I think it speaks to the monumental strength of the core of Mario and Luigi that even a game as bereft of interest as Paper Jam is still fun. I know I've been tearing into this game for being unremarkable, but I want to make it clear that sticking to tradition or playing it safe is not an inherent deal breaker for me when it comes to long-running franchises. To give you an example, and speaking of long-running, Sonic Colors is my favorite Sonic game and one of my favorite games in general. Because it's a Sonic game, Colors gets dragged pretty hard nowadays for not aspiring to do too many ambitious things compared to Sonic Unleashed, which came out 2 years earlier and is nothing if not ambitious. Colors' story is basic, but manages to cram its cutscenes with jokes that series fans love oh so much. The game takes it much slower than 7th Gen Unleashed, with levels being much more based on traditional platforming gimmicks. There is a lot of emphasis on the Wisp power-ups, which the game heavily encourages you to use to reach the maximum rank. The game's got a few levels that feel distinctly not at home in a Sonic game and has hordes of padding and reused assets peppered throughout. Colors has plenty of problems, and Unleashed is often propped up by comparison in recent years because that game brought so much new to the table and was clearly brimming with ambition and passion from its developers. That is a completely valid perspective, and there's a lot to love about Sonic Unleashed, to be sure. Ambition is a greatly admirable quality, but it's all about reaching a balance with actualized potential though, because I personally find significant portions of Sonic Unleashed to be greatly frustrating, especially at the very end. To me, this is the difference between a game like Dream Team and Unleashed. Dream Team is ambitious, but more often than not, it matches that ambition with quality execution at the same time. Unleashed hits some pretty high peaks, but being ambitious doesn't amount to much if the game is often annoying to play without going through trial and error, as much as I will always respect the spirit. All of this is to say that I can greatly enjoy games like Sonic Colors, which aim to be more iterative, if the resulting game is fun, well-designed, and memorable, all of which I think Sonic Colors is. Paper Jam doesn't disappoint me because it isn't reinventing the wheel, it disappoints because, in most ways, I would consider it a regression of what came before it. All of Paper Jam's most memorable qualities are some of the most frustrating things a Mario RPG could be. A game with a story that even mainline Mario games explicitly focused more on gameplay have outdone. A crossover that doesn't live up to its potential whatsoever. A strange, mean-spirited disposition toward a genuine and lovable character who makes this franchise what it is, and an absolutely endless void of samey NPCs who you will forget about the moment you stop playing for the night. If nothing else, this game made me realize just how much the story does matter in a series like this. When I ruminate over why I love these games so much, my mind tends to first think of the mechanical edge the Mario RPGs have over the mainstream ones. Now I truly understand how much even a silly, light story can and will vastly bolster that gameplay experience, because now I know the void that's left when there isn't one. A great combat system can't support a game that ultimately has nothing else to say for itself. If you love Paper Jam, I'm sorry I couldn't give it more credit. I certainly don't want to shame anybody who loves it, and especially not the folks who made it, but I have no qualms calling it the weakest game in the series for me. Still not a bad time, necessarily. Again, the combat is great, but if you asked me out of the blue which Mario and Luigi game I wanted to replay, on most days, this game would be at the very bottom of that list. What's saddest of all about Paper Jam is that it was Alpha Dream's last hurrah. I don't blame them for having to compromise, judging by how turbulent the business end of things seemed to be, considering they were a few years away from declaring bankruptcy. Not to mention how fatigued some of the staff members were going into Paper Jam. Regardless, this is the end of an era for Mario RPGs. Alpha Dream's legacy will, thankfully, continue to live on whenever people talk about this series. There is a character, a spirit, unique to Mario and Luigi that I'm forever grateful was brought to life thanks to these developers making these charming, delightful games. Even if I wish they got more chances to iterate on the formula, at the end of the day, they made some of my favorite games in the world and formed precious gaming memories that I never want to leave behind. That's a pretty good track record, I would say. Thank you, Alpha Dream, for breathing your own life into a massive genre. Thank you for making some of the best games I've ever played. Well, I'm happy to say, the story does not end there, my friends. We've waited since 2015, nearly a whole decade, for a brand new entry in this series. Nintendo has changed. The staff behind this series has changed. The Mario RPGs have changed, and so too will the Mario and Luigi series change. The question remains, what we ended up getting. Was it a series of changes for the better, or are we worse off charting this current course? Brothership landed in the same realm as Partners in Time, where I can't really tell if people are more favorable or sour on it when compared to other Mario and Luigi games. Me, personally, I don't think any other game I've played in recent memory has instilled such a happiness in me while I played it. I suppose it ends up helping the game that it came out a few days after the most horrifically depressing day of 2024. Thankfully, I still had something to look forward to. I didn't go without my share of things I would change about it, but considering that this series for 5 years went out on the note of Paper Jam being the final bow off stage, I was thoroughly delighted that Brothership revived the spirit of this franchise and ran with it. With Brothership only being a few months old, I wanted to clarify that until this timestamp, I'll be using footage from the first 2/3 of the game. The only exceptions will be ambiguous gameplay clips that could take place at any point in the story. Once we get to this point in the video though, I'll be going into full late game spoiler territory. If you want to try Brothership for yourself though, I highly encourage you to just try it before watching this segment anyway. This game has got a ton of fun surprises in store for you. For some reason, during the pre-release period, Nintendo seemed unwilling to disclose who was making the game, which is strange, considering several prominent devs from Alpha Dream returned, and it was developed by Acquire, the team who co-developed the Octopath Traveler duology. I haven't played those games myself, but it's incredibly weird to hide this from the public eye when this team made one of the most notable breakout RPG franchises in the past 5 years. I mean, I don't think the guys who made Octopath would have been my first guess, but it's hard to argue that they weren't suited for the job, especially given the results. To get my own first impressions out of the way, the only thing about that initial launch trailer that had me skeptical was the NPCs. The Concordians struck me as generic looking and unmemorable in design, and I worried myself thinking they would be written in much the same way. I was proven wrong almost instantly. While everybody suffers from a very deliberate same face syndrome, it's something I didn't think about at all during my playthrough. Firstly, on the design front, every island has a unique outfit theme or color among the Concordians living there. While many of the NPCs share the same facial structure and build, you can always visually recognize where the person is from, which is helpful considering many people end up traveling to other islands over the course of the story. There are 15 islands to link together over the course of the game, and eventually that payoff would diminish if these characters didn't have their unique aesthetic present on each one. It helps immediately create an understanding of how much the Concordians value traveling and establishing community with other islanders. Secondly, while not every NPC is memorable, which is true for every game I've played, I would actually make the argument that the supporting cast in this game is the best in the whole series. I loved every character, both major and minor, almost all of them being new faces to Mario's universe. There is a uniquely joyous and friendly atmosphere to Concordia. Practically everybody you meet is supernaturally positive and welcoming, almost to a fault. Even when it's just Mario, Luigi, and Snoutlet, Brothership has this vibrancy I have not felt a game express in a very long time. Every time you reconnect an island, the victory cutscene that plays is one of the happiest I've had the joy of witnessing. Maybe this is me projecting my inner child here, but I just know that some kid playing this game is watching this scene and getting so excited every single time. If I ever make a game, movie, whatever, I want it to give off this kind of energy, the kind that's so infectious that it simply makes you happy. In terms of theming, Brothership takes after Superstar Saga and Dream Team, with you traveling to a foreign world where practically everything is named around a specific concept. Concordia features a very prominent motif surrounding electricity. Practically every character from Concordia has faces modeled after electrical outlets. It's adorable. The inciting incident for Concordia was more or less a massive power outage splitting the continent apart and severing contact with the rest of the world. The main source of energy in this game is called Connector, which is integral to maintaining the link between the islands and keeping the sprite bulb creatures nice and friendly. Otherwise, they turn into evil, gloam-producing spite bulbs. On that note, Brothership is full of clever wordplay and puns, which is a characteristic I will always cherish in games. I'm not sorry, puns are funny. In realization of this, it was already clear that Acquire understands Mario and Luigi as a series very well. A point of contention I've seen is how Brothership is not as focused on comedy as the previous titles, but I don't think it's something that detracts from this game at all. I found myself consistently smirking at goofy wordplay or the expressive reactions from the characters, and not as much because of the written dialogue. That's not to say the game doesn't tell any good jokes, because it does. It's simply a less prominent element this time. This is the longest Mario and Luigi game yet, and speaking for myself, I think it would get a little exhausting if this game were any more in-your-face cracking jokes at hour 45. Plus, for what Brothership is trying to do with its story, I think the comedic balance is exactly how it should be. Your main goal in Brothership is to set out to sea and reconnect every island in Concordia, all the while combating a newly emerging gloam epidemic, causing people to self-isolate and say insensitive things to anybody who dares speak to them. It's spelled out pretty explicitly throughout that Brothership's main theme revolves around connection and bonds, and I don't think there was a better main theme to put emphasis on for a Mario and Luigi game. This is a facet of this game that I can't temper my adoration for. In a franchise built on the back of these two brothers whose combat system displays an unparalleled sense of synergy and coordination, I can't think of a better foil to them than an isolationist force. What could better put their dynamic to the test quite like the idea that connections are meaningless and that we ought to create a world where nobody interacts with anybody else? It's an incredibly simple idea that I get kind of giddy thinking about. I emphatically cherish this aspect of Brothership's story. An extra boon for the plot is how returning characters from the Mushroom Kingdom get to play different roles than they're typically assigned. Peach, instead of being relegated to playing damsel in distress, is the head of your intel gathering crew, Idle. She and Starlo get to be cool older sisters to these kids. You even have a choice later on in the game to let Peach get kidnapped for her to be an informant on the inside. It's so cool getting to see her insight on major story events and play an active role in plot progression. It's so refreshing. It just makes you realize how underutilized she is as a character instead of a plot device, even in most of the other Mario RPGs. Bowser shows up in the later half of the plot, but this time is not relegated to the penultimate nor the final boss fight. Finally! Like any Mario RPG worth its salt though, he's still a major player in the plot. He butts heads with Zocket's army quite a lot and puts out a manhunt for Mario and Luigi after convincing everyone on Off and On Island that the two of them are criminals. Introducing a second enemy faction at this stage of the game was a great idea for varying up the enemy pool also. It was very appreciated. It makes you recognize that games like Sticker Star and Paper Jam featuring Bowser's army as enemies isn't the problem. It's that they're the only enemies you fight in those games, which is boring. Allowing enemies like Goombas and Koopas to not be the lowest level enemies in a game is rare and again, appreciated. Also, they brought back the Shy Guy Says attack that was in Partners in Time, and I clapped. Bravo, Brothership. Where Brothership shines the brightest is in the fact that Concordia itself feels like the most dynamic and responsive world I've experienced in a Mario RPG, or really any game that I've played. For as impressive as these fictional worlds are, for every flavor of video game there is, I can't help but escape a certain feeling of artificiality when it comes to townsfolk. At the end of the day, in game development, you can only put your resources onto so many things that all work toward making a game's immersive quality enveloping. For me, there's always a small pang of disappointment when something major happens in a story, like something any and everybody should be talking about, and you return to a previous town or settlement, and many of the NPCs have nothing new to say about it. Locations like that tend to feel frozen in time after you complete the requisite plotline for the area. There will always be the same guy telling you about this same thing, whether you're entering the place for the first time or doing a comb-over for the last time before the world is at its end. Again, I'm certain this is an inevitability to an extent, and Brothership itself has NPCs like this, but an overwhelming majority of them go through phases that you can bear witness to that makes Concordia and its people feel adaptive to what's going on in the story. You have the first go around an island where you'll hear about the problems spawned from the unit tree blowing up. Then you'll do a side quest or two that brings you back to that island where you encounter people from other islands taking in the sights as well as the natives telling you about how much better things are now that they're linked back up. Finally, you see NPCs who have been gloamed, or are noticing how strangely standoffish their friends are being. This isn't even a comprehensive list of changes either. Later on, there's even more. I'm not even bringing into the equation Ship-Shape Island congregating this enormous culturally diverse cast from across the many seas of Concordia. I'm not sure I would say Brothership even does this in an exceptional way from most RPGs, but the way the game draws your attention to these smaller changes on the islands when you go back for side quests and the like, nevertheless worked wonders in making Concordia feel like a constantly evolving, living, breathing world. None of the other Mario RPGs have captured that same quality for me so well. I'm scared to know how much time had to go into this part of Brothership, because it was no doubt an enormous workload, but it paid off greatly for the final game. Ship-Shape Island especially was responsible for putting this at the very front of my mind so often throughout my playthrough. It's basically a souped-up version of Super Mario Galaxy 2's Starship Mario, where you build a hardy crew of shipmates, all bringing with them a sense of progress through the game, and especially making the themes of connection and companionship so prominent. We'll be talking about this more later, but Brothership is my pick for the Mario game with the most compelling story yet. Super Paper Mario not included. I've never finished that game, and I haven't touched it in like a decade, but I've heard great things, story-wise. Brothership, in terms of runtime, is very akin to Dream Team in that it'll likely take you 45 hours to 100% it instead of 20 hours. A concerning statistic if you're anything like me after I played that game. Unlike the weakest segments of Dream Team, though, I find that this game does, for the most part, retain that element of variety consistently enough that you don't feel exhausted by the time you reach the finale. There were a couple points where I found myself getting slightly fatigued by being in one place for a little too long, and I'll admit, by the end of the game, I began to feel it creep up on me more often. These moments are few and far between in my experience though, and they're much more forgivable thanks to Brothership's structure. In Brothership, the islands all took me around 40 minutes to an hour to link up while talking to everybody and exploring to my heart's content. Approaching Dream Team in this way would end up making you see the same visuals and enemies for 120 minutes straight on a good day. And if you're achievement hunting, oh, God bless your sweet little heart with all the dodging challenges you're going to be spending time on. I promise, I'm not trying to drag Dream Team through the mud. I love you, sweetie, but it just goes to show that the length of a game is not half as important as how the designers choose to pace a game. You're listening to a Xenoblade fan. I can certainly stomach a 70-hour-long journey if you successfully distract or immerse me from the time investment I'm putting into it. You do return to many islands in Brothership mandatorily, but I think this helps the game significantly more than it hurts it. I felt compelled to revisit every island simply for the gameplay incentive of collecting more connector, so when future revisits demonstrate Concordia's dynamism, even if the story reason wasn't all that great, there was always something there that I cared about. Brothership is the first game I've played where I felt consistently inclined to speak to every single person I ran into, and it rarely let me down. I think the variety in both aesthetics and gameplay on the various islands and islets helps too. On Jellyfish Island, you don't fight any enemies whatsoever. All you do is walk around, talk to people, and explore for item blocks. It felt nice to just go and explore a club in a Mario and Luigi game. It's a similar deal on Conductor Island. The only enemies here are the first ones you fought in the game, so they're easy skips. Instead, it's a segment built for a share of big story moments. The music is meditative, and you feel like you can just take everything in without being on the prowl for new enemies. Most other islands in Brothership have a much higher density of encounters, and each island has a distinct method of shaking up the ratio of enemies to friendly NPCs. Desolate Island, for instance, consists mostly of the big city and its many winding streets and buildings. However, along a few of the roads you run into Zocket's Snapters and Drillbees spooking the natives. Still a few encounters to be had, a boss fight against 10 too, but a largely civilized place with a rodent problem. On a different note, Rainforest Island has no major congregation of NPCs, really. They're all scattered here and there, with enemies being far more abundant. With this being a rainforest and everything, there's little to any signs of civilization to be found outside of the natives, and it's far more combative by nature. I found that the balance of island structure was quite clever, and I can't imagine it would be an easy feat to design over 15 different hubs. The scale of Brothership is quite easily the largest of the series yet, and while part of me hopes they scale down the next games to allow for more brisk pacing mechanically, it was clear to me that Concordia was built with a lot of love and care. You have no idea just how good it felt to realize that the heart driving this series was back and here to stay. Brothership's more prominent side quests do their share of work to help mitigate fatigue with specific regions too. Unlike every prior game, Brothership has a straightforward side quest list like many standard RPGs. As a result, there's a lot more of them compared to prior games, 56 to be precise. Most of them are not as memorable as the best side quests of the previous games, but none of them are bad. I didn't complete any of them without at some point chuckling or smiling, which is the mark of a good enough quest in my book. The Two Adventuring Brothers questline in particular got a belly laugh out of me when the heat-free statue prayers contradicted the wish of the other brother. What made these quests better was that they would give you a chance to visually refresh your palette from the locations you've been visiting lately during the main story. The Burning Sea basically only has two moods, Lava World or Snow World, sometimes both at once if you're special, like Heat Freeze Island. This makes it so that when you get another round of side quests elsewhere, it's a compelling idea to tackle them. Of course, there is gameplay in this video game, a lot of which I've been skimming over, so let's start by talking about the sailing. Sailing, in this game, is more so a means of contextualizing a world map, with the ship itself being more of the appeal and not so much the ocean you're traveling through. If you wanted Wind Waker for Mario and Luigi, you're not getting it, and that's alright with me, cause
Wind Waker's not that good.
you select a current to travel through, locate an island or islet to explore, and launch yourself over there with the cannon. Essentially, the ocean is a flavorful level select. You can spot some curiously shaped reefs as well, many of which reference prior Mario and Luigi games. Find enough of them and Issa Rock, who by the way, has the best name ever, will reward you with gear and build some statues on shipshape with poetry attached. It's cute, and this was the most fun part of sailing for me. You gradually fill out the map as you follow each current, but the exploration isn't really meant to be the fun part. Personally, I've never seen a very strong appeal to exploring the open ocean without being able to dive into it, so I wasn't broken up about this whatsoever. Early on in the game, it's quite slow, but the game makes it a point to spell out how you're able to do things on other islands while waiting for shipshape to make its way over to your next island. As much as I get the frustration of waiting too long in games, I think it would do Brothership a disservice if, early on, it didn't ask you to go back and look at what changes about the islands you just linked up. A lot of detail went into that part of the game, and it's narratively compelling to see the payoff to the work you just put into helping that island. Making that apparent early on is important to what Brothership is trying to be, and you unlock faster sailing before the first lighthouse. I didn't find this to be an issue at all. Shipshape itself is the real highlight of the sailing. It's a constant visual reminder throughout the game of how much of an impact you've had on the citizens of Concordia. This is a small thing, but I love the fact that Brothership uses your central warp pipe to explain how everyone else gets to and from shipshape. I feel like in nearly every Mario game, warp pipes only exist to be used by the player, as if it's some entity that only exists in the world for you because it's a game. It's a really minor thing, but it's cool to see a means of travel, like the warp pipes, being useful to everyone else too. As time goes on, you start to feel like shipshape is your home in Brothership, with faces you grow increasingly familiar with. You remember the toads fanning the back of the ship, the golden Grampy turnip up top, Issa Rock staring off the side, Ark using his telescope to chart the seas, Connie tending to the Unitree, etc. Exploration, hub world variation, that's all great, but the battling system in these games is paramount, so how does Brothership fare? Thankfully, it's as fun as it's always been. Brothership at large hits this strange balance of giving you all the familiar elements you would expect with a dash of news sprinkled in there. This respect of the game is no different. In terms of core fundamentals, this is a straightforward Mario and Luigi system with few gimmicks, which is fine by me. This game is a return to form for the series. Going back to, quote, basics is perfectly suitable. You have your jump, your hammer, bros attacks, items, everything you would expect is there. But there are an abundance of highlights to combat none of the prior games had. It's a cute detail how, in a game focused on strong relationships more than ever, you can't even do a jump or hammer attack without both brothers participating in it. I love that. Their trust for each other permeates even the most basic combat actions. The plug system steps in as the unique customization feature to Brothership, and I would consider it the best one in the series yet. It takes quite a bit to unlock its full potential, but each plug has its own effects that you can mix together with other plugs to shake up combat in ways the game won't even tutorialize until you think of a combination yourself. For instance, using item share and boomerang items together lets you not only get back a consumable, but duplicates its effect for the other bro, all in a single use of an item. You can take advantage of enemy properties like their faction, or if they're flying, to double up on bonus damage perks. Kaboom Attack is a game changer, with it applying AoE damage to your basic attacks, statuses, iron ball drops, and bonus damage plugs included. The game encourages you to think about optimizing these combinations a lot, and it's extra satisfying to combine 3 effects or more into a single attack. It makes even basic jumps feel amazing at points, caveman brain-like when number get bigger. It's balanced quite well too, as every plug has a set number of uses before needing to charge for a few turns, which itself is a property you can alter with certain plugs. This means you'll consistently find yourself rotating through different ones and experimenting, something I think every good combat system should encourage you to do. I'll admit that it can be something of a chore to scroll down the plug list for standard enemy encounters. There are a lot of moving parts to keep track of at any one time, and you end up doing this a lot. On the other side of the coin though, it feels like you're never allowed to fall back on a dominant strategy to trivialize any major fights. You always have to be thinking about something in battle. All in all, this is my favorite customization system in the series because it is by far the best at giving you a reason to switch things up. Plus, it's capable of surprising you with new combination effects throughout the game. When a combat system is still capable of surprising you until the very end, it's one of the best feelings to get from a game. A few of the bros attacks are recycled from prior Mario and Luigi's, but not in a distracting way. Some of them are drastically different, like the jump helmet asking you to focus on left to right alignment as opposed to judging the distance Mario was moving forward, or the red shell not touching any enemies until your final kickoff. Others like Bomb Derby and Yoo-Hoo Cannon are pretty much lifted straight from their respective games. Ideally, this whole roster would be new moves, but even as far back as Bowser's Inside Story, we were seeing repeats from Partners in Time, so I can't pretend I even see this as a problem at this point. Acquire certainly didn't disappoint with the concepts they had for the new ones, that's for damn sure. Hatch Me If You Can, Zapparator, Clockout Blow, Max Mix Vortex, and the final one, instant bangers. Again, Sephiroth is supposed to challenge this? I think not. One thing I am less keen on, however, is that Brothership's challenges ask you to get an excellent on these attacks 30 times each. So we went from once in Dream Team, 5 times in a row in Paper Jam, and now 30 times in Brothership. I think we've gone too far in a few places. I'm sure it's because Brothership is a longer game than previous ones, which is fair. For the final 2 bros attacks, however, and with the game having psyched you out on the ending a few times before, it's hard to tell how much game you have left to get that achievement completed. Pretty much any time I got a new bros attack, I had the next stretch of battles revolve completely around using that attack as often as possible, to the exclusion of every other option. This is my fault for the majority of the game. I had dozens of hours at minimum to get the rest of these done more organically, but the final 2 definitely shouldn't have been introduced so late if they were going to keep that number at 30. In general, I think the challenges were at their best in Paper Jam, as we've gone back to Dream Team's system of getting pre-selected gear and beans as a reward, but it's a great thing that these are still here. In a long game like Brothership, being able to make your own fun or seek out alternative goals in combat is important to reduce tedium, and these fill that role just fine. Plus, for as fun as dodging achievements could be at their best in the last 2 games, at their worst, they were super annoying and pseudo-completionists like me would halt all progress to get it out of the way ASAP. Brothership's achievements are almost all naturally completable if you take it slow and try not to hammer one of them out for 30 fights in a row. I'll have to keep that in mind in future playthroughs. One gripe I have with combat is in regard to initiating encounters. Like prior games, every enemy is present and avoidable in the overworld. You can still get a first strike if you land an attack before touching an enemy. That's all well and good. One thing I found disappointing was that Brothership removed the enemy's ability to make you trip if they caught you from behind. To me, what made this mechanic exciting to use was the fact that you were always making the risk to position yourself just right to snipe the enemy at the opportune moment. You had a very real chance of getting too close and aggroing the enemy and getting jumped yourself. Brothership makes it so that you can get the upper hand, but your opponents can't, which kind of defeats the purpose in my opinion. Luigi is decoupled from Mario's exact movement in this game, which I imagine is partly responsible for this change, but most enemies barely interact with Luigi in the first place to compensate, which was smart. Still, even Mario getting clearly bumped from behind doesn't punish you in any way, as far as I can tell. The only way to end up at a disadvantage going into a fight is if you jumped on a spiked or fiery enemy. It's far from a damning problem, but I think this was one part of the formula that didn't need to be adjusted. It was like this in all of the previous entries for a good reason. I am overwhelmingly happy with the amount of care that went into Brothership, but, there's always a but, it wouldn't be a video this long if I didn't have a list of minor nitpicks. Firstly, I would really have appreciated a new main battle theme at some point late in the game. The main battle theme is good, the whole soundtrack is, even with Shimamura no longer being in the composer's seat. Shout out to Hideki Sakamoto. All I'm saying is, if you got to level 50 like I did by the end of my playthrough, you will have heard that opening cue hundreds of times by the end. It's a tad disappointing there weren't more boss battles also. They're a little too sparse across the board, and it's only a problem to me because everything we did get was fantastic. Secondly, as mentioned before, I don't mind Luigi being decoupled from Mario's exact movement in the overworld. I think that's fine. It's often helpful, even, when you can ask Luigi to fetch the sprite bulbs or help you multitask when breaking boxes or boulders. What becomes annoying about that is how finicky the detection for switching bros moves can be, with Luigi's proximity to Mario determining whether or not it'll trigger a switch. It never got me angry or anything, but it's a small irritation that wears you down over time if it happens enough consecutively. Thirdly, and this is something I forgot to mention about Paper Jam, but these latest 2 games took away the roulette wheel for level up bonuses. Not at all something I need to go to bed at night, but it was a charming, quirky side of spice that made even leveling up its own minigame in the first 4 entries. I imagine it was for the sake of better balancing the game, which is fair. There was always a chance you would consistently get a super low amount of bonus points in the roulette, which would only make it harder for novice players, so it's understandable if a little sad. These are minor nitpicks. What I truly despise, and this is something I can't believe made it into the final game, is that you select Luigi's action icons in battle with the A button, then switch back to using B to attack with him. This sounds pedantic, childish, and immature to complain about from the outside looking in. I know, and I agree. Dude, you're literally just pressing a different button in a menu. Get good. Seriously though, I don't understand the idea behind this. I can see that this team understands Mario and Luigi's appeal very well. They've demonstrated a perfect assessment of what previous games did well and maintained almost all of the charm. The expressive animations, the comedy, the whimsical nature of the story, the heartwarming moments, those are all here. I don't think I'm asking a lot that they maintain that each brother gets their own face button philosophy, because they've gotten that right in quite literally every other respect of Brothership's design. This is the single situation in which Brothership tells you to use the A button to control Luigi, and I don't understand why. The series, up to this point, has always allowed you to go back with the L button when you've selected a command, which is a feature that doesn't exist in Brothership. You have 2 bumpers and 2 triggers to assign actions to. Please use them! I can only assume this was changed for playtesting purposes. Maybe it was unintuitive for new players to use the B button to select something in combat, but could they not have had a veteran mode option for combat selection? Just an option, please? I can't see why it works like this in the final game when it doesn't apply to any other situation outside of, you know, the main battling system. Overwriting that muscle memory was a process that was going on for the entire game, and I wish I was kidding. A more serious problem begins to rear its ugly head when it comes to how Brothership starts. I have to be fair and give Dream Team some due credit here, because while I didn't find myself being bothered by Brothership's pacing, I have to agree with the common consensus that it takes too long to rev up the engine in the beginning. A good bottom line for me in Mario and Luigi is that it shouldn't take longer than an hour to unlock your first bros attack. It's kind of the main appeal of this duo working together in combat, and more options in a turn-based RPG is seldom a bad thing. In Dream Team, it took me 3 hours to get the first bros attack, and in Brothership, it took me 4. Both are bad in that regard, but Dream Team is much easier to defend because it introduced badges right out of the gate, not to mention you fought a fake boss and a real one by that point in the game. It also made a good habit of barraging you with new puzzle mechanics, bros moves, and combat abilities at a steady clip. Brothership has significant stretches of time where you will be making no progress in some of these areas, and in the beginning, it can be puzzling to go nearly 4 hours without even a minor boss fight or a bros attack. I'm inclined to think that this was for the purpose of consistently pacing out your abilities for a longer adventure, but to me, it's a sign that Brothership didn't need to be 10 hours longer than Dream Team in the first place. I immensely respect what Brothership commits to for its world and story. Both are a highlight of this game, more than any previous one. But more than ever before, you can also tell that the play experience is being subjugated every now and then in service of them. The pacing is the primary victim in that respect, and it sucks that Brothership falls into that category of RPG where, if you recommend it to somebody, it requires the preface of, alright, just trust me when I say, it gets good after 4 hours. This is the facet of this game where I can completely understand why series veterans wouldn't enjoy it, because the approach here is noticeably different. It sucks too, because once you get to the Burning Sea, I think this game hits a stride unlike any other Mario RPG I've gotten around to playing. What I was most intrigued and pleasantly surprised by is how Brothership emphasizes its themes more than any other Mario game. This is your final spoiler warning for Brothership, by the way. From here on out, I'll be putting late game footage on the screen and talking about end game plot points. I'll give you a few seconds to click off and do something else. Alright, let's do this. So yeah, Brothership is the first Mario and Luigi game where I can say they really went all in on making this a proper story that I found was the driving force of the game. The cast of characters definitely helps prop it up. I think nearly everybody looks cute as a button, and it made sympathizing with them all very easy. Every time Connie walked by on Ship-Shape Island, I felt my lips curl up. Everyone who becomes a part of the Ship-Shape crew, aside from a Daphne, she is the worst, is at the minimum a charming, delightful presence. Nobody in this game gets left behind. They all get something unique to do in the narrative. By the time you're prepared to launch into the Solid Tree, seeing the whole crew gather behind you and put in a word wishing you well is one of the best moments in the series, and only because Brothership cared to give everyone their own moments to shine. Gorumbla, for instance, is the first boss you fight in the game, and strikes you as the mindless bad guy archetype. He's destroying everyone's art on Rumbla Island, and he's clearly doing it for fun. There's nothing else there to motivate his actions. That's how most games would do that, I think, but Brothership makes him a recurring character. He fills the role of a surrogate adopted son of Wilma's, and it's evident he was only ever acting out because he was lonely, he just wanted more attention. You fight him, Wilma gives him some tough love, and in most Mario and Luigi's, that would be it. You would never see that plot go anywhere else. Hell, you'd probably never even see him again. Brothership isn't content to leave it at that, though. When Gorumbla becomes a victim of the Gloam, he caves into his old habits again and starts breaking stuff, and a surprisingly real argument scene goes down. His gloomed attitude makes him essentially write off Wilma being his adoptive mom, and it hurts her feelings a lot. After curing him of the Gloam, Gorumbla makes an overdue apology, but Wilma, quite realistically, can't just instantly forgive him after he disowned her. Make It and Build It chime in to de-escalate things, the two of them make up, and you fill a portion of the bonding can with their familial connection. Again, prior games would have probably dropped these characters altogether, and I think in just this one example, there's more dimension featured in these side characters than some major characters got in the other games. Like, I love Midbis, he's a great rival for Bowser to fight through Bowser's Inside Story's duration, but I don't know anything about his personality besides his devotion to Fawful, his cockiness, and his lack of patience for technology? What motivates him to assist Fawful so much to be his right-hand man? Come to think of it, what compelled Fawful to be there for Cackletta? These are questions that I doubt have a very complicated answer, and that's if they even have an answer to begin with. It's not to say that you need a backstory or a motive to make a good, memorable character in these games, but it never hurts if you ask me. Brothership is the largest Mario and Luigi game by a pretty wide margin, yet I think it has a more consistent dedication to fleshing out its characters more than any other game. I'm not trying to dismiss what characterization was pulled off in previous games. They managed to establish some pretty incredible nut jobs who all had very little screen time. While Brothership's length has been criticized, including by yours truly, I'm overall quite happy Acquire used that runtime to revisit characters and give them more to work with. All of this gives me the room to say that the Concordia cast is my favorite in any Mario RPG. I could not have been better assured that this new team understood Mario and Luigi, quite like when I saw the title of the game itself. While Mario and Luigi's connection has been a prominent element from the beginning, there was an implication in that title that this would take center stage this time around. It's true that the two titular brothers are as lively, silly, and adorable as ever, but this emphasis on connection was also delivered upon across the entire cast, and the result is my favorite story told in a Mario game. It's subject to change, but this game gives me hope that even the mandates holding Paper Mario hostage can change with what Brothership manages to get away with. Every part of Brothership feeds back into nurturing a relationship of some kind. The lush green sea focuses on Wilma's family, colorful sea on Idol's friend group, burning sea on Chilliam and Bernadette's marriage, Gulch Rock sea on Bowser Jr. and Buddy, and Stormstar sea on Cosette and Connie. The burning sea fares the best in my opinion, with you following the couple's journey throughout an entire arc of islands. Bulbfish sees them trying to avoid the drama back home, then you visit their homelands to try and sow the disorder between their villages, then you visit Scorching and Slip and Glide to cure Chilliam's gloam, then you end on the wedding ceremony. I found it unusual, in the best way, how I was following these characters on a longer journey than what was typical of all of the other Mario and Luigi games. It made me quite invested in their relationship for how one-note it is. Another simple idea I've alluded to prior is Brothership's willingness to test Mario and Luigi's connection with the main conflict. What better foil is there to Reclusa, somebody who desires isolation and oblivion and wants everybody to be quiet, than these two brothers who have been joined at the hip since birth, who will go out of their way to help any and everybody? I truly don't believe there's been a better thematic clash of ideas in the Mario series than the ones present in Brothership. One of the absolute truths of this lineage of games is that the bros are in it together. This is why these games stand out. It's the one chance we get to see a whole crazy adventure with Mario and Luigi interacting with one another. Seeing that core thesis of the series get tested this time around made for a climax these games have never escalated to before, in my opinion. If I had a segment of nitpicks before, it's only fair that I make mention of small details I loved too. For one, I love that Mario and Luigi's connection is so strong that they can even break out of a gloam state without an amp berry. I love that the bros react to enemy encounters in various ways depending on whether you struck first or not. I love that when you level up, the other bro is clapping with beaming enthusiasm. I love that the title screen changes depending on your progress in the story. That is one of my favorite things in video games. I love the different hues the ocean takes on as you travel to new seas. I love that Zocket forgetting people's names is a running gag that also fits in line with their philosophy of wanting to force isolation onto everyone. Even committing somebody's name to memory is too exhausting a prospect. Where Paper Jam was insanely rude to and dismissive of Luigi, Brothership evidently wanted to correct this and goes out of its way to give Luigi credit for being the reason the duo is so vital to Concordia. Luigi logic is a fun mechanic that segues into you learning a new bros move or solving a problem in a quirky Luigi-esque manner. This is often the best part of the boss battles, being yet another fun way to integrate a minigame into combat and give you some turns to recuperate or deal massive damage. Brothership deals an overwhelming amount of respect to Luigi this time, more than any other game did. I understand parts of Brothership are not for everybody, but it's stuff like this, the heart of it all, where I can't see what there is to dislike. I'll take a wholesome appreciation of Luigi over a scolding of him any day of the week. My only notable problem with the story is, while I loved the wholesome, friendly atmosphere Concordia maintains for so long, everybody is almost too nice. As per usual, RM Alex's video on Brothership hits the nail on the head, and I find myself inclined to agree with him. Aside from a Daphne and maybe Layden, pretty much every Concordian is already too kind and or social to make it feel as though they collectively ever had to remember the value of bonds. Everybody on each island, with maybe the exception of a few distracted people on Jellyfish Island, will tell you that being looped in will make their lives better in some form or fashion. The majority of the minute number of people who say something to the contrary are surrounded by others afflicted by gloam, and even then, it's pretty rare that this sentiment comes from a prominent member of the cast. It hardly feels as though anybody besides the Zocket minions, Extension Core, and Reclusa had to come to grips with this idea. Cosette, I thought, was going to be a more jaded person, judging by her assuming the role of Zocket. Perhaps she could have had a falling out with somebody, resented that bond, socially withdrew, perhaps to the point where she felt better off alone, and then Reclusa's egg played off of that vulnerable state and turned her into Zocket. Instead, out of the blue, she got completely mind-controlled by Reclusa after finding his egg at a great lighthouse, and thus doesn't morally have to be all that culpable for anything. She wasn't in control, someone was using her as a puppet. She doesn't take things this way, though. She attempts to atone by going into the solitary alone. That last bit is a good character beat, demonstrating how we often go about atonement by punishing ourselves. In effect, making the goal turn from making things right for someone being hurt, instead to making things worse for ourselves. Atonement is tricky, hardly a problem we can work through solo. Cosette obviously feels terrible about what happened. She's a clearly well-meaning person who wants to make things right. This is a good vignette communicating how vital community is, especially in moments of vulnerability like that. Still, I doubt it would hurt to show at least a few slightly more cynical people on the main islands who aren't being supernaturally gloamed into thinking that way. Being alone can be a good thing, Connie recognizes, and she's the character who the game makes it a point to show takes a few detours before a lighthouse to get some time to herself. But based on everything Brothership's told us, it's hard to know when the game is saying some alone time is healthy. As an introverted person, getting some time to myself helps me unwind. I don't need to match someone's energy, I simply have my own headspace to think of, and that offers me some clarity. Granted, if I lived in a world as delightful as Concordia, things would likely be different. Our social habits are heavily influenced by our environment, and perhaps it's why Concordia has so many extroverted types. Brothership falls more into the realm of fantasy than any prior Mario and Luigi game, not because of mythical creatures or anything, simply because everybody is so nice that it could never reflect our real world accurately. That being said, I doubt anybody in a good headspace could tell you that bonds are useless, and it can make the more explicit expressions of this theme grating. Brothership has the most on-the-nose power of friendship moments in a Mario and Luigi game yet. The game earns it by emphasizing this idea for the whole game, but I can see why it wouldn't work for some people the way it did for me. On the subject of gloam, I do quite enjoy how it was used as an agent to challenge the main theme of Brothership. I saw this one Reddit comment that illustrates this quite well. Gloam has less of an effect on the person being infected and instead has the most drastic impact on the people around them. While the ultimate goal of Zocket/Reclusa is to eventually gloam everything into isolation, the chain reaction starts pretty quickly from a simple friend group breaking up because someone very suddenly didn't want anything to do with it anymore. You'll see a parent stop talking to their own child as they wail in despair wondering what happened. It can be heart-wrenching in a way I've never seen in most games, let alone a Mario and Luigi game. It's good stuff. More importantly, that can be traumatizing to experience. I don't think something hurts quite as badly as learning someone you care about doesn't reciprocate that same feeling at all, or maybe worse yet, they used to reciprocate it, but they don't any longer. Rejection hurts like hell no matter who you are, but it hurts in a unique way when a prior acceptance is lost. All that time and energy you've put towards nurturing that bond can end up feeling worthless if the energy doesn't go both ways, and it's hard to repair that trust. Thus, the process is only accelerating everybody's isolation without needing to produce more gloam. It's kind of hard to believe that people are great during the same time period when you're growing apart from a person who meant a lot to you. Meaningful connections take a lot of time and effort to maintain, and often you have to make sacrifices in service of that bond. I mean, how many times have you had to choose between visiting your friends and some other responsibility? If you're an adult, it happens quite a lot. It's tragic, then, just how easily that can all go in the trash because of an agent like gloam or an equivalent drop off the face of the planet in our real lives. You immediately look inward and question whether or not that was your fault. Did you say something insensitive without recognizing it? Were you not addressing them enough in conversation? It sucks. A lot. Brothership sets out to make a genuine commentary about how technology plays a part in mutating our connections too. Reclusa, the ultimate isolationist, has a television for a head and sprouts up virtual reality flowers wherein the victim sees fantasies, often lavishing them with praise or adoration. All the while, the people around them see them get sucked into this virtual world with fear, further perpetuating the loneliness in a world supposedly more connected than ever. What's most disturbing about the gloam, but the flowers to a much larger extent, is that the victim enjoys the isolation. They're getting everything they've ever wanted. It's their fantasy land made reality right in front of them, but none of it's genuine. There is nothing that can fully replicate or substitute the dynamic of in-person conversation, not adequately. Not to say that online interaction isn't a viable means of communication, heavens no. For our caveman brains chemically, though, it's not a suitable supplement for being next to someone and looking at their face, their body language, their eyes. This is as close as you could get to making the internet a plot beat without saying so outright. It's very easy to accept this reality, though, because of the unearned adoration these people are suddenly bombarded with. It's an ultimate dopamine generator. Suddenly, bonds and connections don't require a two-way effort to maintain. Bonds can now simply be people telling you that you're the best. I'm sure that's healthy. Despite being more isolated than ever, the simulation is so convincing to many that they don't feel lonely, they feel powerful. Mario and Luigi really only seemed able to break out of their flowers by being able to somehow share the same simulation and work together to shatter it. It's the Mario Brothers equivalent of being like, alright, I'll delete my Twitter if you delete yours. Does that sound good? Reclusa tries adapting it to better satisfy them, but it's such a surface-level recreation of these people they're intimately familiar with that it barely works. They're simply too selfless to run into the same pitfalls the other captives did, which is interesting. The isolation doesn't come from wanting to avoid everybody, instead it spawns from wanting to be the most important person to the world around you. Ironically, despite Mario and Luigi likely being the two most important people for Concordia's survival, they hardly dwell on it in their own fantasy. Their fantasy land is one where they get to take a day off and everybody is getting along. It's up to interpretation with the two being mute, but I'm certain the first thing on their mind was, what about Concordia when they saw the Mushroom Kingdom again? All of this is to say that once the endgame stakes are made clear, Brothership has some of the best moments in any Mario RPG yet. Reclusa's aforementioned virtual reality flowers and the way they suspend the victim in the air, smiling, is imagery I am shocked made it into a Mario game. Never mind a Mario game in 2024. Even Partners in Time managed to obscure some of its scariest imagery with the DS's limited resolution, but Brothership taking full advantage of its camera made it feel more impactful than anything in the former game. It's bolstered by a factor of 10 thanks to Reclusa's immaculate theme. While on the subject, Reclusa makes his return quite late in the story. However, unlike Dream Team tossing Phantasma aside at the very end, this felt significantly more satisfying as a final boss setup. He's a known entity prior to his emergence and is a spotlight-stealing character for how little of the game's runtime he's present in. He's one of the most easily hateable Mario villains in a very good way. He views everyone as beneath him, mere toys without wants and needs of their own, and he just wants everyone to shut up and let him play. While Mario and Luigi has never shied away from world-ending stakes for their finales, there's a more sinister take with Reclusa. Instead of blowing everything up, he's gonna watch everything and everyone wither away, slowly. He'll watch as people get lonelier and lonelier until everyone lacks the impulse to connect, such that they can't even survive. All of this works up to the series staple banger final dungeon and boss fight. The mixture of challenges in the Solitary was a fulfilling test of your platforming, combat, puzzles, everything. Best of all, the Mushroom Kingdom simulation sequence is unlike anything this series has attempted to do before, and it's awesome. That hallway scene made me ask if this was going to be some kind of Undertale-esque moment. This whole portion of the game did. I can't overstate just how much I want more of this in Mario games. Please, Nintendo, I want more weird stuff. The finale is suitably a multi-phase encounter that sees you hopping between chase sequences, regular battling, a fake-out apology, and one last QuickTime event taking down Reclusa for good. The scale is grand, the boss tells are challenging, the music is great, and the story moments before and after lead in and out of it expertly. The atmosphere of it all makes it feel like this could be the final Mario and Luigi game with how it caps off the adventure, especially in the aftermath of the Solitary's collapse. After all is said and done, Brothership hammers home the importance of connections one final time by allowing you to say goodbye to everybody on Shipshape Island. When I set out to make this video, I had a vague idea of what I was getting myself into and what to expect. I was, not expecting it to be 3 hours or longer in runtime, but I was ready to giggle, ready to pop off when I beat a challenging boss, and ready to grin from ear to ear in recognition of how charming every one of these games is. What I did not expect, and this was something that didn't even cross my mind, was that I would get emotional. In a final pleasant surprise, Mario and Luigi Brothership's ending broke me. Bowser Jr. and Buddy's friendship gets explored throughout the main story and a couple side quests. The two of them enter the plot as good friends, which is a neat bit of continuity from Paper Jam, with Jr. expressing how lonely he was. Buddy befriends Mario and Luigi and helps them break out of prison. When Jr. found out, he felt betrayed and told Buddy they weren't friends anymore. Buddy cares too much to let that keep the two of them apart, so you see him reach out to Jr. to save him or make amends several times, with Jr. barely budging each time. It's a kind of adult plotline to show two kids being estranged by allegiances like this. It's interesting. By the end of the bonding can quest, the two of them are finally on good terms again, but Jr. plays it off like he's merely humoring Buddy. When you get to the ending, you run into this scene where Jr. and Buddy are on the beach, having a chat, when Jr. realizes what has to happen. Buddy, perhaps out of naivete, perhaps in denial, keeps suggesting that they find something to do together, with Jr. having to break the news to him. The two of them have to go their separate ways, and so soon after they made up. Jr. isn't content to leave on a sour note though, so he happily yells out that the two of them are friends no matter what. Buddy then ends the scene saying friends are friends even when they're apart. I don't care to dress this up in any way. I had tears streaming down my face as I read this interaction. In all my years of playing Mario RPGs, or hell, the entire Mario franchise, I have never cried at a story beat quite like this. Bowser Jr., of all characters, was the last I would anticipate would get the waterworks flowing. By the time the credits started rolling, it was too late for me. Every vignette they flash at you in this montage is pure dopamine hit after dopamine hit. Ark reunited with his dad on Bulbfish Island, and I was seeing the world through tears. This is the best ending I've seen in any Mario game. That longing sadness you feel at the end of games like Superstar Saga or Dream Team and saying goodbye to these characters you'll only ever see in this one game winded me this time harder than ever. The longest Mario and Luigi game yet, and I somehow felt like I didn't get nearly enough time with everybody there. Except to Daphne, she is the worst. To Acquire's developers, bravo. Truly, bravo. Not only did you make a worthy follow-up to Alpha Dream's titles, you broke new ground and charted your own path at the same time. Brothership is not content to be a nostalgic throwback, it wants to move this series forward, and I am so on board with that. Soon after Brothership came out, there was this rumor floating around about Sony making an acquisition of Acquire's parent company, Kadokawa, meaning Mario and Luigi's future would be up in the air again. This ended up simply being Sony becoming a major shareholder in the company, not a full acquisition at all, but it made me consider the idea that Mario and Luigi would be MIA once again. I then wondered if somehow Brothership was the final Mario and Luigi game, how would that make me feel? After Alpha Dream dissolved, I thought that was the end of this series, period. In retrospect, it feels silly to say, it's a major Nintendo series, of course it wouldn't be dead, but the sales weren't there for the latest releases at the time. Maybe Nintendo didn't care about these games anymore since they weren't making enough money. After coming back from that, I can't say I have any doubt the series has a future now. But above all else, the idea that upset me the most was thinking about Acquire not getting another shot. This team understands Mario and Luigi, and I am positive if or when they get another chance, they could make the best Mario RPG yet. The thing is though, if by some lottery odds chance this game sells so poorly that Nintendo decides, no, you know what, this is it, the series is ending here, I'm weirdly okay with that idea now. I would be sad, don't get me wrong, I can never get enough of this series, but If we end on a note as strong as Brothership's ending, that's alright by me. It just felt good for Nintendo to recognize how much passion people have for these games. Whatever comes next for this franchise, I am beyond grateful that Brothership exists as it is, flaws and all, because I could not have wanted a more spirited comeback. You know, I'm really happy to say that in the process of making this video, I successfully rediscovered why the Mario RPGs mean so much to me. I had to get footage of Thousand Year Door and Super Mario RPG for relevant comparisons in this video, and with both games I wanted to commit to a full playthrough even though I already had what I needed. That has to mean something when I marathoned 6 games of very similar structure and mechanical identity. If I hadn't been spending time making this video, I would have continued playing both of them. I mean, at work I started daydreaming about trying Color Splash and Origami King. This project only serves to remind me how special every single one of these games is. There's a reason people have such passionate opinions on the subject of Mario RPGs, and I know that millions of people have the same connection to one of these games that I have to Partners in Time. No matter your age, these games were capable of introducing millions of people to the wondrous bliss of what RPGs can be. Creatively, I would be in a drastically different place in my life had I not played these games and felt compelled afterwards to try something new. I owe so much of that to the fact that these games have such a universal appeal, such a simple but effective set of systems, such wit and charm, and such a brilliant display of creativity spanning nearly 30 years of releases. I swear you almost always wish these games had more depth and customization, had a more intense story, even more developed characters. And then you look around, and it all makes sense. You've got a lot of games to enjoy now, kiddo, so go nuts. I know in time our taste changes, it's supposed to, but even having ventured to some of the most iconic and beloved RPGs ever made, there is nothing in the world that feels the same as playing Mario and Luigi. Let me repeat, my appreciation is not mutually exclusive. I love so many of these games that I've been comparing to this series in an often unfavorable way. In fact, if I still have footage of it, odds are I probably love it. There is so clearly an appeal to the more mainstream takes on this genre that works. If it didn't, people wouldn't still be buying, playing, loving, and making them. There's simply a different focus to them, and that's a very, very good thing. Art is only meaningful if people are allowed to express themselves in different ways. That's what makes video games in particular so fascinating. An RPG, or hell, a game in general, can be so many different things no matter what it categorically is. Still, with me growing to love those more standard takes, you would think that these games would fall to the wayside as a collection of baby's first RPGs for me. Games that meant a lot to me at the time, but otherwise are too kiddie and simple to truly get invested in nowadays. I think this is where Mario's strength truly lies as a franchise, because finally getting around to playing through all of Mario and Luigi, I felt as though none of the appeal had worn off from when I was 8 years old playing Partners in Time for the very first time. These games have a magic unlike any other. No other series captures the same energy, the same feeling these ones do, and that'll always keep me coming back time and again. If Brothership is any indication of what we have to look forward to, the magic is here to stay. Thank you, Mario and Luigi, for helping me begin to realize all that time ago that I do, in fact, love RPGs. Thank you, Mario and Luigi, for choosing to blaze your own trail, to carve your own path. Thank you, Mario and Luigi, for making me smile and laugh countless times. Thank you, Mario and Luigi, for bringing so much joy into the lives of millions of people. Thank you, Mario and Luigi, for all the memories. And finally, thank you, Mario and Luigi, for always being there.